attendees. We can just elevate them.
Okay, we now have a quorum and we'll begin the COPRAC meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and with permission of the chair, I will start with the roll call. Dina Roche.
Here.
Ken Bacon, Sarah Bonola, Steve Bundy. Hold on 1 second. Hunter is on here. I just need to promote him. Give me a second. And so is Sarah. Perfect. And I believe this is, give me 1 second. Justin, are you with us?
Justin, can you hear?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, I just need to rename you so that I can elevate you to a panelist. Sorry. I can't elevate you to a panelist. Okay, we'll just keep it this way. Steve Bundy, David Carr, Justin Fields.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. Toby Inlander.
Here, I'm here.
Adam Koss.
Here.
Brandon Kruger.
Here.
Amber Lee.
Here.
Joel Mark.
Here.
Kyla Rowe.
Here.
And Hunter Starr.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, and Mimi, I think you called Sarah before you put her back here, and I don't think she's here now, right?
Yes, I have her down.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Okay, great. Well, it's good to see everybody, and hopefully you got the email with some slight scheduling changes for the day. So we'll try to move through that in that new order, and we will start with the any public comment. Andrew, I think somebody was going to call in for public comment. Do you know if that person is still planning to make a public comment?
I'm not sure if that individual is here, but if anyone, any member of the public would like to make a public comment, please indicate that you'd like to do so by using the raised hand feature in the Zoom application. I don't see anyone raising their hand.
Okay.
So maybe that individual didn't show up, but he did provide written comments, and I did share those with the committee. And I think it was mostly focused on the succession planning, most closely associated with the succession planning opinion. So the drafting team can maybe take that into consideration. Although an individual is raising their hand, Mr. Kenneth Howard. So let's take that public comment if we can, Mimi. Should we limit them to 2 to 3 minutes, or how do you feel about that, Dina?
3 minutes, please.
Yes, 3 minutes. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about agenda item C, number 3, succession planning that's in your agenda. It is my desire to bring to the attention of the Board of Trustees through your committee what happens when an attorney does not have a succession plan and fails to protect their client. I am speaking with you today because I have experienced firsthand the consequences of the death of an attorney that failed to have a succession plan. The committee has a copy of my email in which I outline my appalling predicament caused by an attorney that did not have a succession plan and/or by his associate attorney not following the succession plan with diligence. The State Bar of California's mission, as I understand it, is to protect the public, enforce rules of professional conduct for attorneys, and discipline attorneys who violate rules and laws, among other things, of course. The public should never be told that their active legal file was taken to the grave by their late attorney and that there is nothing the State Bar can do about it. The State Bar must implement enforceable protection for the public in order to prevent neglect of client matters in the event of a sole practitioner's death, and that designates another competent lawyer to review client files, notify each client of the lawyer's death, and determines whether there is a need for immediate protective action. Although the State Bar of California does not appear to currently have enforceable attorney succession plan rules, it would seem to logically follow that in order for a sole practitioner to comply with the diligence requirement of California rules of professional conduct, they should prepare a plan that designates another competent lawyer to review client files, notify each client of their death, and determine whether there is a need for immediate action. Please take succession planning from a recommendation and make it a rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Howard, for that public comment. And we agree it's a very important issue, and we really appreciate your feedback, and we hope that you'll give feedback when we have our draft opinion out for public comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? Anyone else calling in for a public comment?
Nope, that is all we have.
Okay. Then we will move along on the agenda for the announcements and staff report.
So good morning, everybody. I need to apologize once again, just random circumstance. I'm away from my work station this weekend as I'm attending another wedding. But this weekend, it's my brother who's getting married, and he was very kind enough to ask me to be his best man. So I'm in Santa Barbara right now, and according to my mother, I have important responsibilities that I need to attend to throughout most of the day to alleviate the stress of both my brother and my mother. So I won't be able to be with you guys all day today, and I'll probably have to drop off by or before 11 o'clock. However, I'll be back at the meeting in September, and I look forward to being able to be with you for the full meeting, for all meetings going forward. I did want to be here this morning for the staff report because there are some really important items that I need to report upon. And the most important being that last week, the Board of Trustees took action on their regularly scheduled appointment of new members and officers to the committee. They do it every year in their meeting in July. And as part of this process, they also considered the committee's request, which you will recall, the committee took a look at last month in June from their letter to for their request to formally reinstate the advisor position. And I'm very pleased to report that the board approved the formal reinstatement of the advisor position. And in addition to that action, they also took other appointment steps, which I'm going to report on. So the advisor position will be back in its regular role, or as it was previous to before it being sunset. And in that role, Dina Roche will fulfill the term next year as the advisor. Justin Fields will be our chair next year, and Sarah Benola will be the vice chair next year. And so I do want to congratulate both the committee on their hard work and thoughtful presentation and request for reinstating the advisor position. And I'd like to congratulate the three members of who will be the officers for next year. So a real quick congratulations to the committee writ large and the three officers who will help lead the work of the committee beginning next year. Another item that another action that the board took with respect to appointments is, and this is getting in the weeds and some of you might not remember it, 3 years ago, the board took action to amend the appointment terms from 3 years to 4 years. And as a result, next year, it'll be the first time that we have a cycle in which members completing their third-year term won't be cycling off the committee. And so we are anticipated to lose only a single member from the committee. It would either have been the chair or now the advisor. And staff looked at how that would affect appointment cycle going forward. And inevitably, every 4 years, we'd have an appointment cycle with only one person, and that seemed less than ideal. And so staff requested that the board reappoint a member whose term is set to expire to be appointed to the committee for a single year in order to roll off the committee next year. Now, granted, we'll only be appointing 2 persons next year, but 2 seemed better than 1. And the board agreed to reappoint Toby Enlander to the committee for a single year. And we're very excited that Toby agreed to serve with us for an additional year because she provides the important perspective of a public member's point of view to the work of the committee. So Toby will be with us for an additional year next year. So I want to thank and congratulate Toby. And finally, the committee had a robust number of applicants. I think the total number of applicants was 43. And I just want to take a really quick moment to thank all members of the committee who took time to reach out to anyone or to encourage others to apply. I know for several meetings I've been asking you all to consider doing that. And I don't know if anyone did or did not, but for those of you who did, I think that might have resulted in a strong applicant pool. And so I want to quickly thank those members who engaged in that outreach, because the board appointed 4 new committee members, all of whom have really strong backgrounds in legal ethics and professional responsibility. So I'm excited for the committee and the committee's work to bring these individuals on board. Some of you may know these individuals, and I'll just read their names off in alphabetical order. We'll be appointing Elizabeth Bradley, Cassidy Chivers, Eleanor Mercado, and William Munoz will be our 4 new members next year. So we're looking forward to that. We're looking forward to Dina continuing along with us as an advisor, and Justin taking over as chair. And congratulations to Sarah being appointed as the vice chair. And again, big thanks to Toby for sticking with us one more year to help balance out the appointments for the committee. And that's the end of my staff report. I know it's a lot of information. If anyone has questions for me, I'd be happy to answer it now. Or of course, you can always contact me anytime in between meetings. I'm always happy to talk.
That's great, Andrew. Thank you so much for that report. And that is terrific news about all the appointments next year. It's going to be very exciting. Of course, we have one more meeting besides this one with our current configuration, so we can, talk about that committee and some of the members that will be cycling off. We'll do that for our next meeting. But so we're still in this group, but it'll be exciting for those of us that are moving forward with a new group too. That's always a fun time of the year with mixed feelings of missing some people who are leaving, but being able to welcome some new people and into the group, and that's always a really exciting time. So thanks for that news, and thanks for everyone who helped with giving feedback and supporting the letter for the reinstatement of the advisor position. I think it's I'm glad that it was so well received by the board, and thanks for all your input on that.
And can I ask a quick question, Andrew? Do the new members know of their appointment yet, so that we can reach out to them and because if we know them, reach out to them and congratulate them?
Yes, notification went out to them, I believe, on Wednesday of this week. So it went via email. So those 4 individuals whose names I read, you could contact. They should be made aware at this point.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and if you happen to know anyone that was applied and was not chosen, and I think they're a strong candidate, I definitely encourage those people to continue to apply. We had, as Andrew said, a really strong candidate pool this year. And so it's always good to encourage people to continue to apply if they're interested in being on the committee. Right, Andrew?
Yes, of course.
Yes. Okay.
We like strong people.
We like strong people. No, but I just mean it was a particularly, like, there was a lot of really good candidates that weren't selected, so it was a great turnout of interest. So in any event, we can move on to the agenda unless anyone else has any questions or, yeah. Oh, you're right. We need to approve the minutes from last meeting, right? Right, Mimi?
Correct.
Okay.
So if we can get a motion and a second.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Thank you, Hunter. Second, anyone?
Second. Adam.
Adam, sorry. Okay. All right, we'll take the roll call vote. Dina,
Yes.
Ken Bacon, Sarah Bonola,
Yes.
David Carr, Justin Fields,
Yes.
Toby Inlander.
Okay. I wasn't there.
Okay. Adam Koss,
Yes.
Brendan Kruger,
Yes.
Amber Lee. Was that a yes, Amber?
Yes.
Thank you. Joel Mark, Joel, I think you might be on mute.
Yes, sorry.
No problem. Kyla Rowe,
Yes.
Hunter Starr.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Mimi. All right. So why don't we, anything else, Andrew, that we need to cover? I don't think so. I think
Nope,
we
that's
move
it.
on
Yep.
to the agenda. Okay. So we moved things around as I think you guys got that email this morning. And so the first opinion that we're going to discuss this morning is the ethical obligations when working remotely. And Sarah was the lead drafter on that opinion, so I'll let her lead that discussion.
Okay, thanks. And the revisions made to this draft opinion weren't significant, but they were mainly addressing, I think, some of the comments from the last meeting, just changing some of the language from, to make it clear that we're talking about in some situations good practices as opposed to ethical obligations. So the first one, I think is on page 2. I think this was based on Dina's comment at the last meeting. If I'm recalling correctly, we changed lawyers should also disable listing capability of smart speakers to should consider doing that. So that's one edit that was made. And then going on to page 3, it's just a very kind of similar type of edit made, changing it is a good practice to require passwords for video conferencing to Zoom or Teams meetings. Then the next edit is on page 4, which this is under the duty of communication, and this edit was along the same lines, just explaining, just adding some minor edits. I don't know that we need to discuss that one. And then I think it's the unauthorized practice of law. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too far, but there's an unauthorized practice of law discussion. The other edits are fairly minor. So in this section 5, this unauthorized practice of law, just the intro part was changed based on feedback both from Amber and then follow up from Andrew, where we just made some edits to this intro. I don't think they were really substantive, but just clarifying that. And actually, we might not have, this draft actually does not yet include the edits from Andrew. I'm looking at it, so maybe right now I propose we make that edit, and I'll explain it, which is, let me make sure I'm getting it correctly. However, the committee, so instead of saying the committee is not authorized by the state bar to opine on the issue, Andrew proposed that we change this to say, however, the committee is precluded from, and then delete authorized by the state bar to, and then change precluded from opining on. Yeah, I think that catches it. Let me make sure, however, the committee is not precluded from opining on the issue of unauthorized practice of law, including whether particular conduct or activity constitutes an unauthorized practice of law. And Mimi, could you just tell me what page we're on right now currently? I'm trying to see. Okay, so I think that was really it. And there were some other just minor tweaks made that I don't think it's worthwhile to discuss. But I will pause now just in case others on the subcommittee or anyone else has any questions or additional comments regarding this revised draft. And just as and I did try to catch each instance where, based on our discussion at the last meeting, where we were talking about something where it really might be more of a best practice as opposed to an ethical obligation to make sure the language is appropriate to address that type of situation. But those were really the primary edits I made throughout this draft. So I don't think there's really much else to discuss unless anyone else wants to raise a particular issue.
I have a few minor comments.
Sure, thanks, Justin.
Sure. You know, every time I've read this, the term WeWork stands out to me, and I think it's just because I'm a Luddite. I don't really know what that is, and then I Google it, and I still don't know what it is. And so, just as a matter of this opinion, I think is going to be very useful for the next 50 years. And I don't know if that term is going to be outdated then. So I'm just wondering if it's a material thing, or if we could just cut it and say it plans to rent a shared workspace.
I think that's fine. I have no concerns with making that edit.
Okay.
Yeah, along
I know we're
those
like
lines,
really in the details here.
Yeah, no, I made a similar edit that I didn't go over, but just changing. I think before I was talking about as many mediations are now virtual, which is no longer true. From the time I initially started drafting this, I just said 4 virtual mediations, because I know a lot of stuff is going back to in person now.
Exactly. Well, that's sort of apropos of my second comment on the red line, page 5. You know, again, I think that this is so instructive for events and circumstances after we are all hopefully done with this pandemic, that maybe on line 133 and line 141, instead of specifically referencing COVID-19, what I was thinking of is maybe just thinning out some of the references to COVID-19, which are elsewhere and still included and important. But I was wondering instead if we could just say, so for instance, on line 141, if an emergency or illness impacts the lawyer, and just kind of cut one more reference to COVID-19, and then same with line 133, you know, following up on the same language with line 141, we could just say, even if litigation matters are delayed because of emergency, an emergency or disaster, or whatever phrasing you wanted to use, just again to thin out a couple of references to COVID-19. So people, when I think they read this in 40 years, it's very, very clear. This is not just about COVID-19. This is about any emergency, any illness. That's just, again, very minor details, but that was kind of what struck me on page 5.
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree with those edits.
Very minor, because I think we're getting ready to vote this out soon. On line 166, I just saw a typo. It should be, I think, law firm instead of law firms.
Yeah.
And then, you know, my final comment is on the UPL paragraph that we just discussed. And is Andrew still with us? I can't see in my thumbnail here. Do we still have Andrew?
I'm here. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah,
okay.
I'm here.
No worries. And this is more of, I guess, a policy preference question for you. Is I'm wondering how important is it to have this paragraph front and center as the first paragraph in this section 5? And what I'm specifically wondering is, could we put this as a footnote, or do you think it's important enough that we have to say it up front in the text of the opinion? Because when you read it, it's a bit distracting, and you wonder, you know, particularly with the new language, the diction precluded, it just has a connotation to it that I think it's going to focus the reader and maybe distract a little bit from the substantive points we're making when we start the next paragraph. So Is this important enough that we need to have it in the body, or is it something we could stick in a footnote?
So it can definitely go in a footnote if that's the group's decision. Most every other time, UPL and prior opinions, I think almost all of them, the disclaimer is contained in a footnote. Doesn't have to go there, but that's just the past practice. I think it should be mentioned in some manner, whether it's in the body or in a footnote. And I don't want to speak for Sarah, but my sense in reading it was, I think, I don't know, my sense was the drafting team thought this might be an obvious issue. And so they just wanted to tackle it head on by bringing it front and center for the reader. I could be wrong about that. That's how I interpreted reading how it's framed in the opinion. But to answer your question, it can definitely go in a footnote.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have strong feelings on this. That was just the question that struck me, and that's helpful to know that in the past that it has been put in a footnote. So I really defer to Sarah and the drafting team, whether they prefer to just keep it front and center or put it as a footnote after the first sentence or paragraph or whatnot. But again, not strong feelings there, but I just wanted to flag that in terms of just style. That's all my comments. Thanks.
Yeah, just I understand your point that it might be distracting where it is and not necessarily in a footnote. The reason I put it in the body is because I think this is something that is an important issue to many lawyers who are working remotely. And so initially before, when this topic came up for this opinion, I was thinking that this would be something we would be able to address, and I wasn't aware of this prohibition on addressing it. So I don't know if that's common knowledge that others would know. So I thought maybe it made sense to include it in the body to explain why we're not addressing this, which I think some other people will view as an important issue and wonder why it's not really being fully addressed here. So that was my reasoning, but I don't feel strongly about whether it goes necessarily in the body or a footnote following, I guess, the first sentence. So if others have an opinion, I'm open to considering moving it.
This
Yeah.
is Amber. I think that's right, and especially in light of the ABA opinion. Can't remember the number, but it's from like May of this year. That expressly addresses an unauthorized practice of law issue in the context of remote working. I thought it would be odd for this opinion coming on the heels of that opinion not to address it, or at least explain why. Convey that we're aware of the issue, but we just can't address it. But I don't have any strong feeling about keeping it in the body of the opinion or moving it to the footnote.
Yeah, so if it's in the body, with respect to the wordsmithing here precluded from, I don't want the state bar to think that we're implying that we're not happy that we can't address it. And it kind of leads the reader who may not be familiar with this rule, when they read this, it sounds like we're precluded. We can't talk about this, and well, why not? And so if it's like front and center like that, I just wonder if that might be the reaction of certain readers, and I don't want to distract from, again, the substance of what we're saying, which I think is really good. If we leave it in the body, and again, everything I'm saying right now, I don't have the strongest of feelings. This is just my reaction, and then I will shut up. But if we're going to leave it in the body, would, I guess this is again more for Andrew. If we were to leave it in the body, would it be enough to say that the committee does not opine on? Or do you feel like it's important enough to use the precluded from language?
If your suggested edit was agreeable to everybody else, in fact, I like what you just said better than precluded from. What I was trying to do, I offered the edit to Sarah for much the same reason that you're touching upon, Justin. I mean, I think it's important. I understand what you're saying, Justin. I really appreciate what you're saying. And to be frank, I'm hopeful the rest of the committee would be agreeable to your edit. So I'm fine
Yeah,
with
I mean, that way,
does not.
if we say.
You have to
does
say
not
who or
opine-
why or how. They can call me and ask,
Exactly,
and I
because the
can give them all the
precluded, it
information.
makes the, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I think
Precluded,
I
I
cut you
think, leaves the lawyer, because we're right, our audience is probably lawyers. They're gonna be like, oh, they're precluded. Well, who's precluding them? But if we just say, we don't opine on this, I think those types of questions go away. And we're very clear that this is not something we do. And with that, if folks are okay with that edit, you know, again, that for me takes away any, I feel less strongly about it being a footnote if we just say the committee does not opine on the issue of unauthorized practice, blah, blah, blah. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to keep going there. I'll be quiet now.
Sarah, how do you feel about however the committee does not opine on?
I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards putting it in a footnote rather than making that edit. Because when if I were to read this prior to me being a member of this committee, I would wonder why aren't they opining on it? This is an important issue, and I think my comments might, if I were on a bar association, might address that issue. You know, why isn't the committee opining on this particular issue? So I think explaining briefly that we're not, you know, authorized to do so is something that others might want to know. So, but if it's distracting, or if it will, like, I'm okay moving this whole sentence to a footnote. But I think if we just say we're not opining on this issue, that might cause readers to question, well, why aren't they opining on this issue? Because it's something that I feel that a lot of lawyers who are starting to work remotely and have been are concerned and want guidance on this issue. And I recognize there's been guidance from other jurisdictions in the ABA. So,
Justin, when you were suggesting that we change it to does not opine, the committee does not opine, did you mean, and I guess there might be kind of an inherent ambiguity in the way that's phrased, but you meant that we do not, as a committee, we do not do it, not we do not do it in this opinion. And I think if we make it clear that we mean as a committee, we do not opine, as opposed to in this opinion, we do not opine, I think that might address the issue Sarah has, because I think it's a legitimate issue.
yeah, Andrew, that does make sense. Maybe we could say, but
yeah.
However, this committee does not opine. Yeah.
That's a great kind of clarification.
Can I just ask, is the policy of not opining on the unauthorized practice of law, is that a written policy, or is that just like a directive that we've always heard? I don't really know the genesis of it.
Sure, I can share it with you. There's, it was a board action back in the 90s. There's a board resolution. This issue came up with another ethics opinion at the time. And it was related to antitrust concerns. And as presented to the board, the question was whether or not the committee may opine on these issues. And as broadly speaking, as a risk management tool, the board directed the committee to not opine on the issue of the unauthorized practice of law, including whether particular conduct or activity does or does not constitute the unauthorized
Okay,
practice of
so
law.
that's very helpful. Thank you. I think Sarah's point makes a lot of sense, that attorneys might think that we're just taking the easy path and never opining on the unauthorized practice of law. I think it is a little more, and then people might think that we're shirking a duty or something if we don't explain that we are not permitted to, or something like that. That's just my 2 cents on it. And
sure. Yeah. I'll keep my thought to myself.
I think it's cleaner and clearer to put it in the footnote, as Sarah suggested. I don't think it doesn't raise any questions about the committee's role. And I think, to go back to Justin's first point, it puts the emphasis in the statement, in the opinion, on the information we want to get across, which is in the second paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, big picture for me, following up on Toby's comment, is my concern is mostly with the tone, to ensure that the state bar, when they read this, doesn't think we're taking some kind of jab at them, that they don't let us opine on the unauthorized practice of law. So I'm trying to navigate the tone in a way that we can tell the reader, look, as a committee, we don't do this, or we can't do this, without it making it sound like, you know, we're handcuffed by the state bar in some way that has a negative connotation to it. And so it's a bit of a, threading the needle in terms of the language, but that's big picture. That's all I'm trying to get at. I think it's important for us to be clear that we can't or don't opine on this. It's just a matter of, the words we use to articulate that, and whether we want to put that statement up front or in a footnote.
So if you did a footnote, would the first paragraph simply be the first sentence? Or would you combine the second paragraph into the first sentence and add the footnote at the end of licensing practice law?
I think the whole, if we're going to move it to the footnote, I think the whole thing has to be moved. Just leaving that first sentence there seems a little odd. It seems to highlight its import more than what we're intending to do.
I agree that we should, we're not moving the whole thing to the footnote. I think you're just talking about combining, are you talking about just combining the moving the second paragraph up to follow the first sentence? Is that what you're saying, Amber? That's what I was, yeah, okay.
That makes the most sense to me. I also think that footnote seems to make more sense to be at the end of the paragraph. Even though we have another footnote there, but we can have a combined footnote, I don't know, where you're talking about the other states have issued opinions, and then we basically say like but we are not going to be,
It's slightly unusual, but what about a footnote at the end of the header? So after 6125 to 6133.
That's where I was thinking it would go, Andrew.
So the bold text right there.
And then not start it with however, just.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Can we look at the footnote? So the committee does not opine. You can fix it. I'm trying to capture, I think, what Justin said. Or this committee does not. Did someone have that edit to say?
Yeah, I was trying to incorporate what Hunter was saying. I think we were trying to make it clear that it's not just that we're not opining on it in this opinion. It's just that we cannot opine on it, period. So I just want that point to be clear.
I'm trying to find an example. I think normally the text has usually been uniform.
I can find it from a different opinion. I mean, it's pretty common. We don't have to spend the time on that. I can find something and you and I can work on it, Andrew.
That sounds good.
I agree.
Well, I mean, it is something we're going to potentially vote out. So we just want to make sure that there seems to be different views on some of the language. So I just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
Sorry, Dina. That's the document I was looking at, Mimi. If you could just do a word search for unauthorized practice of law.
Yeah.
From the combined.
Yeah, I'm looking at my combined right now. Hold on, give me 1 second.
And search from the back going forward, not from the beginning, because you're going to have too many hits from the older opinions.
Okay.
My concern is I think the language in other opinions might not address the issue in the way the committee is currently discussing it this morning.
I mean, so one,
I think it says
Or-
this opinion does not opine.
yeah, this opinion is not intended to address or opine on the issues of unauthorized practice of law. That's one formulation that we have. Hold on, let me just copy this before I keep searching for another.
I think it's pretty consistent. I think it's a very similar formulation to that.
Yeah, we do not address unauthorized practice of law issues related to
Yeah.
blah. Uh,
I researched it before. So I guess it's a question
I mean, this is
for this
the-
group as to whether or not this other previously used language is sufficient for.
This is what he said in a previous opinion. This opinion is not intended to address.
The last formulation that you mentioned, Mimi, which is issues of unauthorized practice of law, I think actually helps get the point across, in that we just don't touch those issues. And that was, you mentioned kind of two formulations, the one that we're looking at was first.
Yeah, I actually kind of like if the revised formulation that we are using, but changing it to say, like Hunter said, so the committee does not opine on issues of unauthorized practice of law instead of the issue. Because then I think it's a little more, it's clearer that it's not just that we're not addressing it here in this opinion, we just don't do it, period. And I'd rather be
Yeah,
clear and
it's
straightforward.
a nice clarification that it sounds like prior opinions haven't made that clear. So, and just to clarify though, are the folks suggesting we use this language that's been in the past, which is here, this opinion is not intended to address, and then say this committee does not opine on issues of unauthorized practice of law, including blah, 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 to give that further clarification?
I think as it's written in footnote 30 currently, it's very clear that we don't do it, and that includes not doing it here.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
I think
That's a one.
And I think that from a staff perspective, I think that language is fine. And I would want us to overthink this as long as we're comfortable. And I do think the conversation is helpful. So I really appreciate Sarah and Justin raising it and Hunter's observations as well. I don't want it to distract from the import that the rest of the opinion is obviously going to carry. So can we scroll? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask to read the combined paragraph one more time just to see how it flows.
I mean, I feel like the other place that footnote could go would be after the second sentence, after the recitation of the rule, but I don't know. If you guys, if people are overall happy with the footnote being part of the title, then that's fine too.
I think it works just fine as it is. It could probably be a footnote to the first sentence also, but I think it works the way it is.
Can you scroll down a tiny bit, Mimi, so I can see that 31 footnote? Thanks. Are people generally comfortable with this change to this paragraph, or is there other feedback about it? Sarah, you're happy with this change? Or
Yes, I'm happy with the change.
I have two minor things, Sarah, at line 75, 77. So the first comment, it just relates to that last sentence. The first comment, which is in line with what Justin said about WeWorks, and I have the same thought, which is taking out WeWorks, is the question of like, do we want Zooms and Microsoft Teams in here, or do we just want to say video conferencing for confidential attorney meetings? You know, my inclination, I know that everyone's Zoom is the thing, so I am not super tied to this idea, but you know, you could say Google Meets. I mean, there's a bunch of them. I don't know that we need to name all those types of things, but so that would be one idea, is taking that reference out and saying, similarly, in using video conferencing for confidential attorney-client meetings. I don't love that it is good practice to require, and I know this was sort of what we were talking about last time, and I raised that question of not wanting to have should require, because then it implies that it's a breach of the duty if you don't do it. And of course, what we're really talking about here is all these reasonable measures that people should be, you know, I can use the word should, but you know, you would take based on these obligations and of confidence and diligence and confidentiality and things like that. And it kind of goes to the 5.1 and 5.3. And I just wondered if we should take out the good practice and say, you know, should be considered for all participants, or something softer, but basically saying like you have a duty to analyze whether or not the measures that you're taking and the way you conduct yourself remotely with respect to confidentiality or other issues, and to see if they're sufficient to comply with the rules. I mean, that's sort of the point that I think we're making. And the good practice, you know, again, to me, feels a little bit, we're now talking about best practices, which we're not really supposed to be doing. So it's like that fine line, which I think we've kind of gotten away from, you know, trying to sort of make this about policies and procedures under 5.1, and that you need to do these things in order to fulfill those obligations. And so I'm a little bit uncomfortable with any direct language about good practice or the best practice, because then it makes it just seem like practice pointers. And this is a hard thing for this opinion, because it really is doing a lot of those things. But the way I've described it is sort of how I'm viewing it in the context of the rules, which is like you sort of have the duty to analyze all that. So that's my feedback on that change. The other change I was fine with, but I didn't know if anyone else, and I don't feel super strong about it, but it did stand out to me as that sort of good practice, best practice thing.
I support making those changes to these, you know, lines 76 and 77. Yeah, I was struggling with how to phrase some of this, and I had looked at how the ABA opinion did it, and they had kind of used it's good practice on some occasions, or maybe it was another ethics opinion I was looking at, and I thought that was a good way to do it. But I think your suggestion of should consider, I like that as well. So I'm fine changing that.
So in using video conferencing for you should consider?
Or lawyers should consider. Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, that makes sense. Right. Yeah.
Or maybe requiring instead of using passwords. Using passwords seems weird.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
Does anyone else have any feedback on that point, or think that's?
Just to offer support, I think it's a good idea to avoid specifying brands or specific pandemics, because again, this does look like it's going to be helpful far out into the future. And some of these might come off as anachronistic or even confusing in 20 years. And what was the language before we changed it to it's a good practice to include? I thought it was something similar to should require.
Yeah, we had should be required. We didn't have that first part. We just said when they're using it, passwords and pins should be required for all participants. So we change it to like sort of the lawyers should consider requiring. It's more like it's their duty to analyze the reasonable steps and whether it's reasonable to require. I think that's probably a better phrasing of that, but what do you think? Hunter?
I know, I think that's absolutely right, yeah.
Or maybe the use of instead of using.
Which
I leave it up to you.
which I think might be better phrased as utilizing.
Utilizing, should consider utilizing passwords. Okay.
Well, then I just wonder if we should change the sentence because it's like similar in using video conferences, and then you're talking about utilizing. So it's like,
What about similarly for? Or I don't know.
yeah,
Or for video conferencing, or maybe
Or maybe
when.
put that to the end. Similarly, no, never mind. That doesn't work.
About when using.
When using, yeah.
Yeah, that's better. Oh, but then we're still.
Do you need the word all participants?
I don't think it's critical. We could delete that, Amber. I mean, Mimi, sorry.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I don't see the need for all participants. Because it could be each participant or just for participants.
I think just for participants is
Okay.
fine. I thought we were trying to get rid of, I'm still reading this sentence. I thought the point that we were trying to edit in the beginning was though, if Dina, were you saying that you didn't like having using and then utilizing it in the same sentence?
yeah. I mean, I'm fine with
Yeah.
it. I was trying to think of how to rework it, but then it's just like that's maybe too much work to rework it. It's like,
Well, instead of utilizing, what about requiring?
well, that was where we started.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah, that's okay.
just showed up.
Yeah. I like requiring probably better just because we're already using and utilizing, but I don't know.
I prefer requiring as well, as I'm reading this sentence again.
I was going to chime in to say exactly what Sarah just said. I like having the word requiring.
I think requiring also covers the potential eventuality of maybe somebody else is setting up the meeting. The attorney would not be utilizing the password, but the attorney could require if they're going to be a participant. So I think that requiring is better.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other, not to prolong it, the only other word that came to mind was issuing. Could consider issuing passwords or pins, but that might not be
I
as
like
precise.
requiring
Stronger.
for the reasons that Hunter said. It's like the
Sure.
kind of, yeah.
I don't disagree.
Okay, does anybody have any other feedback about this opinion or revisions or issues they want to discuss? I think it's a great opinion, Sarah.
Well, thank you. Is it ready yet to be voted out, or what's the thought?
My view is that it is based on the revisions of the last couple of meetings and our discussions. Does anyone have any concerns about voting it out today? And they can make those known, and otherwise, if they don't, then someone can move for a vote.
The one thing we are going to change though, sorry, is it plans to rent shared workspace. We're going to get rid of the WeWork, right?
Yes.
And I think that's the only mention of WeWork in the entire opinion. So besides that, we should, and then you want of staff to maybe eventually go back and remove some of the references to COVID-19 pandemic if possible.
I mean, I think in there it's fine because you're talking about different things that have happened. I mean, personally, but I agree with Justin, I don't know if you ended up making those revisions or not, Mimi, to the other comments he made about removing COVID, which I think were appropriate.
I mean, there are a lot of references to COVID, so let me see.
Yeah, I like it in the intro sentence
intro.
where it was providing examples. I don't think we should remove that first reference that you highlighted, but I thought you made the ones that, and I mean that
I did.
said.
You know, referencing COVID-19, people are not going to forget about this in 5 years. Has the Judicial Council ever set forth a bunch of emergency orders because courts were closed for 5 months? I mean, there's a statute of limitations emergency order that's going to be relevant for the next 8 years that people are dealing with. It's not like it's going to be forgotten. So I get the idea of wanting to take it out some and not make it entirely dependent upon it, but it's going to be something that people remember unless they were born in like 2020.
So,
also, every mention of COVID-19 is followed by the words and other disasters.
yeah,
So,
that's an edit I made throughout based on Justin's, I think, feedback from one of our initial meetings on this opinion. But I do, yeah, I'm okay if we want to take out like it on line 107, if we want to just say, or financial impacts.
resulting from disasters.
Yeah,
We
I'm
could
okay with
say
that.
like pandemics and other disasters. I mean, because we're gonna have a couple more pandemics before the end of the, I don't know. But on
I'll say
102,
that.
I don't know. I'm not trying to be grim. I don't know what the future holds, but it seems like
So I think pandemics and other disasters. So instead of a pandemic, right? Is that what we're?
yeah.
And I think 102, it should say COVID-19, because I know that there have been new rules and procedures relating to COVID. So I think it's good to keep it in, especially since we have and other disasters on that 102 line.
Well, I mean, the other thing we could do, I think if you think that's appropriate, Mimi and Andrew, is just basically we could vote it out and then you could go through, Sarah, with somebody and just review and just say, are there some places where it makes more sense to replace the word COVID-19 with pandemic, on a judgment? I don't feel like, I would feel strongly one way or another. There's places where it makes sense to leave it in. I think, overall Justin's comment is well taken, that we don't, it's going to apply more broadly, which it does by its language, but maybe we could do that way where you could just review that. Is that appropriate, Mimi and Andrew?
That's fine.
Yeah, we've done that before.
Okay, so I can work with you on that if you'd like then.
Perfect.
Right. Sounds good.
Okay, does anyone want to move to vote this out for a public comment, subject to those minor changes?
I'll make the motion.
I'll move.
Okay, that was a lot of. Let's go one at a time. Was it Amber?
Who got in first? Yeah. Who really wants to be it? The movie?
I would like to make the motion to move it out, subject to what we just discussed regarding the language of COVID-19.
Okay.
Thank you, Hunter. Does anybody really want to be the second?
I second that.
Thank you, Amber.
All right. So this is for, the motion is to approve 20-0004 for a 90-day public comment circulation. There's no further discussion. I'll take the roll call vote. Dina Roche,
Yes.
Ken Bacon, Sarah Bonola,
Yes.
David Carr, Justin Fields,
Yes.
Toby Inlander, Toby, you're on mute.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Adam Koss,
Yep.
Brandon Kruger,
Yes.
Amber Lee,
Yes.
Joel Mark,
Yes.
Kyla Rowe,
Yes.
Hunter Starr.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yay. All right. Great job, Sarah, and everyone that helped with that. That's going to be really great. Moving along to 20-001, the lawyer as expert. Adam, take it away.
Okay, you'll have to bear with me because I can't make my printer work today, so I'm working off of the screen and notes. So let me find it.
Give me 1 second to pull it up. 20-001.
Okay, so I took this back and I mean, just kind of moving through it. Let me put on a different screen or see Mimi's up.
Yeah, 1 second. I'm trying to get it up too.
It's fine. I'm trying to not look at what we're doing. Usually I have this printed out and it's much easier. So when I start off to the side, I'm still paying attention to all of you.
Okay, hold on. Share. Screen, lawyers, expert witness. There we go. Okay, and let me just make this a little bigger. Okay.
Okay, so generally from the get-go, at some very good suggestions, I tried to completely, essentially eliminate the consulting expert aspect of this and make it very clear that we're talking only about testifying within the digest and the factual scenarios. It's just some wordsmithing and making sure that I'm actually following the rules and what they say and making it clearer. So moving down, the bigger changes, moving down to discussion section A, which is on 75, page 3. This has been edited and hopefully shortened, although I can't really tell because it's all in there, even with the track changes. But the idea here has been to essentially take out the consulting experts and merely footnote them. I have highlighted on line 80, this, or 81, I guess, on the version that Mimi's got. This does not opine on the practice of law. I think that's pretty much what we just discussed. I think that's what we just discussed is how the committee says things. It's not ultra relevant to this opinion, but we do need to assume that a testifying expert is not engaged in the practice of law. And then it's just footnoted that for quite a bunch of the other things, that there's other ABA opinions that talk about consulting and whether that is the practice of law, and essentially is just saying we're not going to do that. So this opinion, most of the opinions out there, the ABA specifically, the DC opinion 337, which we cite in here, most of the opinions having to do with expert work make their focus actually on whether or not a testifying and consulting expert are practicing law, which we clearly aren't getting into, and we've addressed some different issues. So this section is now hopefully shorter and mainly there just to set it up that that's not where we're going, but this is how other states have held. Moving on to the factual scenario or the analysis, there are two main changes that I have taken on within them. Number one has not really changed. Some stuff was cut out and then kind of added back into scenario 2. The big issue was 1.10a imputation. And at our last meeting, Steve rightfully pointed out that I was taking a leap with the analysis of 1.10 for what does and doesn't impute, because it has to do with imputation for representing clients. I knew I was taking that leap because I wanted, it was a results oriented act, frankly. And the idea behind it was I didn't like allowing the experts to essentially have these conflicts, but Steve is right. And the rule does not say that. And I think it's probably on the whole correct to not impute things when the rule doesn't require them and to work it out elsewhere. So I took that out. Based upon that change, if you look at around line 220, the red line here is different than what I was looking at. Maybe up one. It was I think it's 224 to 238 or around, yeah, 224. Is the portion, so this paragraph is the portion that talks about the fact that it does not impute. However, it goes into a potential personal conflict that lawyer would have, which has nothing to do with practicing law necessarily, nothing to do with prior clients, but a personal conflict does not impute to the entire firm under 1.10A1. I have looked, I have been suggested to look, and I have not found anything interpreting what a personal interest is under 1.0A. So I have written it as assuming it is a personal interest. I think it is a fair assumption in this instance that an expert representing the other side or not representing, but working on behalf of the other side as an expert would be a personal interest at the very least. So I have written it in as assuming it is, but I don't have anything kind of interpreting what a personal interest actually is within the meaning of Rule 110. Comment 2 talks about conflicts for non-lawyers within 110, and I think it is very fair to essentially deem somebody acting as an expert witness, even though they are a lawyer, if we've assumed that they are not practicing law and that acting as an expert is not practicing law, I think it is very fair to analogize a lawyer who was previously an expert and is a member of the firm to a secretary or a paralegal or some other support staff that may have a conflict, and say that that person should be screened out of the new representation because of knowledge that they have. So that is how I have tried to deal with the imputation problem, is allow the representation but require a screening. That does raise one more issue, which I have written in this, which is the result of 1.7B for whether there is a material limitation of the expert actually working on the new case. Under scenario 2, I have said that the expert working on the case is a material limitation under 1.7B. Having knowledge, remember in scenario 2, the expert it was an expert first and then becomes representing some party adverse, and the expert has potentially gained confidential information. So that's the issue we're working as. The expert has confidential information that would be helpful to the new client. Under scenario 2, I have deemed that to most likely be material limitation on the expert representing the new client, which would require full disclosure to the new client, because that's the only actual client under 1.7B. It would need informed written consent, and have written it in the guise of, I don't think, and I tend to agree with this, that you could get informed written consent, because I don't think the expert could disclose all of the confidential material information that the expert has because it's confidential. And without that, I don't think you could get the actual informed written consent that would be needed under 1.7B. That is not how the answer is written under scenario 3, which is down on the next page, I think. Under that one, we have discussed within the committee that it is not a material limitation, because who cares? And even if the expert has this confidential information that the expert can't use, well, client's in no better or worse position, because expert never would have been able to, or client never would have had access to that information in the first instance. In other words, why is the client in any worse position? Because there's an expert within the law firm that has this information and is not divulging it, because client wouldn't have access to it anyway. That has been a discussion among the committee as well during the formation of this opinion. I tend to frankly agree with how scenario 2 is written. I think the expert working on that case while having confidential information would be a 1.7b material limitation that would preclude disclosure. I think under how scenario 2 is written, that expert could be screened out without the formal screening notice of 1.10a, given the expert's not practicing law. But I have written them right now so that they don't jibe, at least in my mind, they don't jibe, because I wanted to provide both scenarios for the committee so that I could quickly write a fix that either says as above, well, frankly, will say as above, we do not deem this, or we do deem this to be a material limitation. I don't have a distinguishing basis for getting around that. I think either the committee thinks it is a material limitation, that somebody within the firm has confidential material information, or it is not. My personal opinion, it is, and I am uncomfortable with allowing somebody to continue on with that knowledge that they know they have that they can't disclose. I understand the alternate argument, but that is my personal opinion. There are 13 or 14 or 15, I can't remember how many committee members we have now versus 3 months from now, but a lot of other people in here that I think should voice which way we go. So that's really the big change within this opinion. Other than that, it is some wordsmithing, some making sure I got the rules right, and whatnot. So I'm happy to have that discussion. I'm happy to see if people agree with my analysis for comment 2 of 110, and that the fact that a lawyer acting as a non-lawyer in a certain situation should be treated as a non-lawyer moving forward. The screening is much less onerous for non-lawyers than it is for lawyers. There's no requirement for notice to the former client and signing off and screening procedures or whatnot. It is just screening. I'm trying to think of any other major changes that were in there. I don't think there are. I think I focused a little bit more on some disqualification issues because the ultimate answer, I think on scenario 1, is ethically you can do this, but 9 out of 10 times you're going to be disqualified, which is something I hope came through within there. But the disqualification under brand it is not per se disqualification. It's essentially a burden shifting analysis. We assume that you have had and used this confidential information, but you can show that you didn't, is how the case law works out. So with that, I think the biggest issue for discussion is going to be this imputation versus whether or not under 1.7b, the expert has material confidential information that needs informed written consent. And with that, I open it.
I have some comments, but I'm going to let someone else go first, just because I have to step out for just 1 minute, but I will come right back.
I kind of, Steve is not here today, is he?
He was at some point, but I don't see him. He might have dropped off.
Because he was the one with the issue on imputation, which he's right. And so I tried to rewrite it to get that out. So hopefully I addressed his concerns.
So I can start with some of my comments out of that now. Right. Oh, is Steve, were you about to speak? I might have.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, there he is. Yes.
I've had just hold on.
Steve, you might need to turn off the speaker on your laptop if you're on the phone, or
I've been having intermittent cutouts of my internet service, so I've been trying to follow on the phone, but the phone is not allowing me to participate
oh,
as a speaker.
hold on.
It lets me on only as an attendee with a permanent mute. So that's probably a result of my own inefficacy as in using the phone.
Yeah, no, when you dial in as a caller, it doesn't recognize you as a panelist because it goes by your Zoom login, unless you're using the app on your phone.
Yeah, well, I'll have to set it up so I can use Zoom on the phone in the afternoon against the possibility of the internet cutting out.
If you rejoin by phone, I can always just enable you to speak, like Justin's doing.
Right. Well, hopefully the internet will hold up here. Adam, I want to say that I appreciate your response to my earlier comment. And I think you fixed that piece. I guess what I don't quite understand in that discussion is why, I think I come out with the view that the fact that somebody in the firm who's not involved in the matter has confidential information that they can't use is a material limitation conflict, right? And I hear you saying you think it is, but that it can be solved by screening. But traditionally, a material limitation conflict can't be resolved by screening.
So let me clarify what I mean then, because maybe we agree, which would be awesome. I think if they are not involved, it is not a material limitation and that you simply screen that person out. So for instance, expert is in scenario 2, the way it's written, expert works as an expert for one on behalf of one client, and I know I'm shorthanding this, but for this purpose, expert works as an expert on behalf of one client, and then firm is engaged later on behalf of a new client by the opposing party to expert, right? In a substantially related matter. If expert is not working on the new matter, I think expert may be screened out, right? Instead of just experts not working on it, I think that the firm should put together some sort of screening procedure to take expert out of it and ensure that expert does not have any involvement in it, similar to the way a firm would do under comment 2 with a secretary, paralegal, support staff, or anybody else that might have that personal conflict. I was under the impression from prior discussions that there was belief that expert could work on the new matter, even with that confidential information, provided expert didn't disclose it. Which I don't think expert can do.
Okay, let me see if I can work through. I agree with you that if expert was a consulting expert, that's what we're talking about.
No, we're talking testifying expert with gaining confidential information. So testifying expert prior to disclosure, so that the information is still privileged under California law.
Okay, so we're talking about, so the triggering event here, the triggering distinction here, which I didn't quite pick up, is that the person has been designated as a testifying, they've not been designated, but they've been retained as a testifying expert, but they haven't been designated as one.
Correct.
The assumption is they're going to testify, but that hasn't been disclosed to the other side, or is it that they've actually testified? I'm not quite clear.
If the lawyer has already testified, I believe, now you're making me go substantive. I think the rule is testimony is what what deems the information no longer privileged and can be asked. In other words, I think once you're designated, a lawyer can still be withdrawn and the information is still privileged and confidential. So assuming my case law is right, but I'm fairly certain that's the rule. I do not think there's any issue, and I think I wrote into this. Once the expert has testified and there is no more confidential information, I think there's no expert. An expert could work directly against the party on behalf of whom they've testified, because there is no confidential information. Everything is publicly known. Everything is unprivileged, and expert could testify. And I believe that it is written that
You have that,
way.
you have that at line 239, and
Yeah.
I agree with that, although I wouldn't frame it as you do, as the privilege is lost, right? I would simply say that nothing the expert learned at that point can be deemed confidential, right?
Well, so, okay, go ahead, sorry.
I mean, we're assuming this person is not a lawyer and has disclosed that they are not a lawyer, right?
Yes.
And that they're not practicing law. So it's a little hard to know how it's the privilege that is being that's involved here. Right?
It is a,
how can you have a privilege if a person is not acting as a lawyer and has indicated that they are not acting as such?
as a necessary third party to the privileged communication, same as
Right, but that's not the privilege. The idea is then that they are they are bound because they're contractually bound, right? They don't have a privilege obligation, but they are contractually bound until they testify.
I think that I have problems with that sort of factual formulation of that section too, related to our need to make it pretty clear in that scenario that the person is a testifying expert and not, and I like the way you remove some of the consulting expert stuff, but I think even in the fact pattern, we want to say they disclose they're an expert, that they're not going to receive confidential information. Have some more information in the facts, just making it clear that that person's role is that. And then I think you could say at the end of that, if for some reason they were not, that we would have to reach a different conclusion if they were hired as a consulting expert and with the purpose of, advising the client on a particular issue. Because I think that's what you cleaned up in some places in that section too is really complicated in that way. And I think to make it easier and to also suggest the best practice for experts who are hired as testifying experts should not get confidential information. They should make it very clear they don't want that, because it's highly problematic. And if there's a point in the future where they're going to be disclosed as an expert, which is the intent, and we know it may not happen, they should never receive confidential information. I mean, we've seen many times where that goes horribly wrong, right? So I think we can suggest that as a practice in the facts, and then sort of under that analysis, they've never received confidential information. And so then your conflicts analysis goes from there. To the extent that I think you could say in a footnote or in a separate way, you could describe if they were not, there would be an exception, of course, to this if they were hired as a consulting attorney on this matter and received privileged information, then they'd have to go through a different analysis.
But it's not privileged, it's confidential, which is the experts receive confidential information all the time.
Well, confidential attorney-client communications. I mean,
I'm not talking about attorney-client though. We're talking about client secrets, right? I mean, I could have an expert that I hire early on in a case and show information that I think is going to come out in evidence, right? I show that expert.
How is that confidential if it's going to come out in evidence?
But I'm wrong. And for some reason, it's not going to come out. Or let's say the other side never requested it. All right.
You would never want your expert to have information that they are then going to have to be in a deposition or testify about related to the scope of anything that they got from you. If it was a confidential attorney-client communication, if something like that, that's subject to discovery. So why would you ever want to put an expert into that particular position?
I agree. So let's say, I mean, I'm spitballing a scenario, but let's say I'm starting a case off from scratch and I hire an expert before I file it. and I give my expert all of the documents that I have regarding a case, and there's a smoking gun in there. And my expert reviews these documents, finds a smoking gun, and tells me, you're done. I don't know how I can help you, and this is over, right? That's all a confidential privileged communication until that expert is disclosed and testifies. Now, let's say the other side never asked for it, right? There's no production rule in California that says give everybody all the evidence and deal. There's no Rule 26 in California. So I don't turn that in for, or what Hunter has, where he's got to do it constantly.
Yeah.
We don't have that in civil litigation. The other side doesn't send me a document demand, doesn't ask for the smoking gun. I'm duty bound to not hand it over to them.
I understand that,
That's
but to rely
confidential.
on the idea that someone else is going to act incompetently, that your opposing counsel is going to incompetently, that they're not going to ask for all the information that you as an expert have reviewed or considered as part of your opinion, seems to be not really where we want to go with that. I just don't see. I feel like this is an opportunity with that particular piece of the expert to suggest how lawyers who are often experts on these issues would frame an agreement and the type of information that they would receive. And if someone told you you're going to testify an expert, I would never want to receive any information that may or may not ultimately be disclosed. Now, if I'm never going to testify, that's a totally different ballgame. But you're talking in here about a testifying expert who has to assume that they are going to be disclosed and they are going to be deposed, or they have to testify about everything that they reviewed, whether or not it is admissible evidence on a particular point. That's a whole other thing. They've reviewed it and relied on it in forming their opinion. Like, that is all subject to discovery. And if the other side doesn't do their job, I mean, that's the other side not doing their job by asking for that information as part of the document production request.
So if we're going to work on an assumption that a testifying expert never receives confidential information, I could easily write this opinion by there's no conflict, nothing's confidential, who cares? I think testifying experts have confidential information and have confidential communications until they are disclosed and testify. Right. I have conversations with my experts constantly where I'm very careful about it, obviously, but you need to have a frank conversation with an expert just to determine whether or not you want that expert to testify, right? I have to ask hard questions of my expert that I think the other side is going to, and get the answer. And if I think I don't like the expert's answer, then the answer is probably, okay, you're a consultant and I'm not retaining you to testify. And I make that decision.
Can I ask Adam, I understand what you're saying. I'm just going to say, when I testify as an expert, my agreement will say, I'm not your lawyer. I'm not forming an attorney-client relationship. There will be no privilege, right? I also will say, typically, that I understand that I'm going to be getting information that is confidential, and I will preserve it as confidential to the extent that I can, but they should know that that ability may be limited, and that in particular, to the extent that I testify, right, the normal rule is that everything that I have learned in the course of preparing to testify as an expert is a proper subject of discovery, right?
Yes.
And I think that accurately states, actually, although that's written out, I think that's also an accurate statement of my common law obligations, if you will. That is to say, that ordinarily I would not have the freedom to use or disclose the information that I learn, whether or not I testify, but that if I testify, I will be typically under a legal obligation to disclose what I learn. That seems like I think we want to spell that out, but that's, I think, the working assumption about our expert here, right? Our expert here does not have a privilege obligation, right? They may well have a confidentiality obligation, but it is effectively that a confidentiality obligation is erased at least to the extent that they testify fully, right? Because then everything they learn becomes a proper subject. That would be the way I would analyze it. Does that make sense?
I agree with you. I thought that was written, so
And
I think we're
and I
having
guess
two
my question
separate.
would then be whether Dina, does that make sense to you? Is that how you understand the relationship with a testifying expert?
Everything that you've said, I agree with, but my point, and I've really struggled with this scenario too, and the sort of, maybe it's just the way it's laid out from that perspective, and it's unclear to me at different times, and I think it's inconsistent about whether or not the person has testified or is anticipating to be testified. But the idea that, you know, when you have a testifying expert, that they're going to have some kind of confidential, or they do have confidential duty, the privilege is going to somehow apply, and that they're going to have this confidential information that we, you know, I guess it's the sequencing that they're not going to be able to disclose, is something that it's sort of like after the fact, like we say in this scenario, if it turns out they don't testify, well, the privilege would be lost, which I don't think, well, in any event, that's sort of like the after the fact scenario. But when you're really the expert and you're the attorney giving that information to the expert, that is, you know, that's a question, right? What are you going to give that person? And you shouldn't assume that that person, and I think it's an opportunity to make that fact pattern clear. And then at the end of that fact pattern, talk about that sort of point about if they were a consulting expert or if they hadn't been disclosed, of course, that information, that they would have a duty to preserve that confidential information. I just think it's the way the scenario is, we were discussing it, it's off to me in that way, like that discussion.
Right. It may be that the way to think about this is to distinguish two situations. Not a privilege. It's not privilege, right? We know it's not
Right.
privilege because we know he's not acting, this person is not acting as a lawyer, right? So they can't have a personal attorney-client privilege with anybody. They may have common law, or I think the underlying question is really, do they have an underlying common law or contractual duty of confidentiality, right? And if they do, that can create a conflict of interest for them, right? If they have an underlying duty of confidentiality, whether it's common law contract or express contract, that obligation does, to my mind, would create a potential conflict in the event that they were actually representing a client, because that obligation could prevent them from vigorously representing that client. And I think that's what you're saying, Adam, right?
Yeah, I think we're having two different, Steve, I think I can address your concern about line 238 and 239 fairly easily by taking out the word privilege and saying something along the lines of the ability to prevent disclosure of information or communication shared with the expert would be lost. In other words, it's not a privilege anymore, but there's no disclosure. So that I think I agree with you on your analysis, Steve. I think Dina's issue with, say, line, well, frankly, with the whole scenario, but specifically about 216 to 238 is a completely different issue. And I can give you my rationale for how it was written, and then hopefully we can come up with a basis. But I specifically did not, in scenario 2's facts, I did not say whether or not this expert had been disclosed and testified. And that is because once the expert has been disclosed and testified, I don't think there's really an issue at all, because there is no more contractual common law duty or anything else to prevent any information from being disclosed. I will tell you on line 241, I had initially written this much stronger. And I had initially written, basically, once the expert testifies, no harm, no foul, who cares? And there's no scenario where it matters. And I think rightfully this committee in prior meetings said, you know what, we don't know. What if the expert wasn't asked about that during deposition? What if it never came up in trial? Is there still some sort of confidentiality obligation for information not shared and not asked about, even though there's been these depositions? And so it was softened. And on 242 says absent facts not present and assuming no other basis for the confidentiality, expert and law firm can do whatever they want, essentially. And I think that's probably right. You shouldn't have a black letter. This is permitted, and it should be more, frankly, written like lawyerly, more likely than not, based upon the facts that I know as I see them and that type of thing. So I think I agree with you on that, Steve. And the reason that I spent more time analyzing the prior to disclosure and testimony issue is because I think that's where the meat of it comes in. And that's where I think that you might need to screen expert out as a non-lawyer under comment 2. And that's where I think expert most likely could not work on a subsequent case under 1.7b, because the informed written consent would be difficult to impossible to get from new client when expert was still contractually bound to keep information confidential. So that's the reason that it's written this way. But I think it might even be a fundamental, what I hear Dina saying, and I agree with her, is when I hire experts, I'm very careful about what I disclose to them, as I'm sure everybody in this room is, because everything you give them and everything you talk to them about is if most likely going to end up being not confidential the minute they are disclosed and testified. But Steve, you pointed out, and I think rightfully, in your agreement, you say, I understand that I am going to be receiving confidential information and I will do everything legally bound to keep that confidential unless and until I can't. And I also think that is right. I think it is an important public policy to allow free discussion among litigants and experts prior to testimony so that I can test them with confidential, with what I hope will still be confidential information, so that I can have those discussions, so that I get a proper and frank investigation. So I think that this entire scenario 2 rests upon the assumption that expert may have information that is confidential and non-public prior to being disclosed and testifying. Which is why I spent only 3 sentences dealing with the now they've been disclosed and no harm, no foul in any scenario I can think of. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Adam, I have some questions about this since we're talking about scenario 2. The analysis of imputation in this section, you kind of said in one line, it doesn't apply because it's a personal interest conflict, but I feel that we should analyze what if that personal interest conflict poses a material limitation, because then it would be subject to imputation. And maybe it's our opinion that it doesn't, but we just say, I think there's a line, and I'm not seeing it on the screen currently, but just says that it doesn't, no imputation because it's a personal interest conflict, or we don't analyze it more.
You are looking at line. I'm looking at the wrong opinion.
Oh, 229 maybe on the screen, on there now. Yeah.
So the rule. So within the prior iterations, I had imputed under rule 1.10a, which says, while lawyers are associated in a firm, none of them shall knowingly represent a client when any one of them practicing alone would be prohibited from doing so by rule 1.7 or 1.9. Okay. But nobody represented a current or former client under rule 1.7 or 1.9. Right. So now we're dealing with, unless the prohibition is based on a personal interest of the prohibited lawyer and does not present a significant risk of materiality. So that's 1.10A1. There is no definition of what a personal interest is. So I went back to 1.7 B, which talks about the lawyer's representation of the client will be materially limited by the lawyer's responsibilities to or relationships with another client, a former client, or a third person, or by the lawyer's own interests. And I think those last two, a lawyer's responsibilities to a third person or the lawyer's own interests, would be what we have here, right?
Agree with you, Adam, that there's likely a personal interest conflict, and I have a puppy barking in the background here. Yeah, my question wasn't really about the personal interest conflict, which I agree there is. And I know you weren't able to find, I guess, California authorities on point. I wonder if maybe there's some ABA authorities that we could point to on personal interest conflict. But putting that as my question is more about the rule 1.10 under imputation A1, which you seem to be analyzing, and you analyze the first part of it where it's no imputation, where it's based on personal interest of the prohibited lawyer, but it says N does not present a significant risk of materially limiting the representation. And I felt like we weren't addressing that second part of the imputation rule. So that was my concern.
So I think the significant risk of material elimination of the client by the remaining lawyers in the firm is the important part there. Right? It's not whether expert would have the material limitation. It's whether the rest of the lawyers in the firm would also, which is why I think that unless experts shared that confidential information with all the rest of the lawyers within the firm, I don't see how experts' non-legal activity would present a material limitation for the rest of the lawyers within the firm. So I can try to make that clearer that that's where I'm going, because I do think that's why I don't think expert could continue on with the case if expert has that confidential information, which is why, which I think is how. However, like if there's presumption of expert's disclosure, so on 216 to 222. And actually even further up.
So, the number reading might be a little bit different because I was trying to keep the paragraph together so you guys could read it as an entire paragraph.
I'm sorry, it is a little off now. So on, from 205 and then the next two paragraphs, so 205 to 221 or so is analysis of essentially expert working on this matter. Which I don't think expert could do. I think that would be a material limitation and would prevent expert from working on the matter. So it's sort of, I guess scenario 2 is a 3-part question, which is, has expert testified, yes or no? If the answer is no, then can expert work on this matter, yes or no? And if expert can't work on this matter, can the firm as a whole take it? And if so, how? I think so the flow chart I would like to get to is expert did not testify. So no, expert most likely cannot work on this matter because there's a material limitation that expert is aware of. Okay, expert's not working on this matter. Can firm take the case? Yes, firm can take the case because it's a personal interest conflict for expert. And there's no material limitation for the rest of firm, but expert needs to be screened. And then as a one-off aside at the end, expert's already testified, it's probably okay for anything. And it's fairly clear at this point that it's not written clear that way. But if that is the premise that is agreed upon, I can try to clearly write that. but that is how I get there with the rules. And I would love to have some analysis from the ABA or case law on what a personal interest is, but the ABA comments didn't help me. The Rule 1.10 comments and case law didn't, so I just haven't found it. And I don't want to write in basically law on what it is. I would rather say, assuming it is, assuming it isn't, and leave it that way if I can't find it. But I will spend more time looking again to find that.
Okay, that makes sense, Adam. And I can try to look as well to help you out. But yeah, I think the one, I agree with what you just said in terms of how you're analyzing the issue. It just, even though I think I agree with your conclusion, I just think providing a little bit more of analysis of why imputation wouldn't occur here would be useful. And then I also had a quick question about, because in this scenario too, I understand the lawyer was a former expert witness. He's not currently acting as an expert witness. So I was questioning, does I think you talked about Rule 1.7 C1, the disclosure obligation, does that apply here to former relationships? Because that talks about has a professional relationship. So I'm just wondering if that still would apply here when it's a former relationship.
Okay. I don't know. That's a good question. But I don't know how, if you have a former relationship, don't you still have some, so I mean, I don't know that you end relationships the way you end representations. I've actually never thought about it the way you're describing it, but I can end a representation by writing a letter to my client saying, I'm not your lawyer anymore. I don't think that ends the fact that I have a business, professional, or personal relationship with that former client. That is how I've looked at that. But I have not given that, frankly, any thought. I've just sort of assumed that my relationships don't end when the job ends.
Well, the question would be whether, even if you assume that that the work of being an expert has ended, if you have a continuing contractual obligation under either express or common law implied contractual obligation, wouldn't that count as a present relationship? If it's relevant to the case, I mean, I think that it would be a little bit like the examples we talk about if you can you sue Wells Fargo if you have a mortgage with Wells Fargo, right? Is that the kind of obligation you have to disclose? This would feel like a relationship an ongoing relationship of a sort. At least that's the question you might want to explore, Adam.
Yeah, and I don't think it is a material. There's nothing about same subject matter, materiality, or anything in C.
Well, so that might be a possible way. It feels like both those dimensions ought to be thought about, right? Sarah's question needs to be answered. If 1.7C, and one answer may be that the continuing contractual relationship of confidentiality is enough.
And Steve, I think to answer your question there, I think yes, if your client wants you to sue Wells Fargo and you have a mortgage with Wells Fargo, I think you would need to give them written disclosure of that.
Well, that's certainly been my assumption, and so I'm just saying that that's a contractual relationship.
Yeah, I mean, look, to give you a great example of that, I mean, I think my business is mostly suing lawyers, and when I find out the insurance company on the other side is the one I use, I there is a written disclosure, some sort of, hey, that's mine too, right? That's a relationship. I think those
Right.
are things that are included within
Right.
C1.
All
So
I'm saying is I think that Sarah's question deserves a better answer, and perhaps
Okay.
that's the better answer. That the contractual relationship sets it up.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Just given the way the 1.7C is worded to consider that issue. But the other question I had about this section that we're talking about now, I think this is the right section. I think, Adam, you mentioned that you analyzed the imputation issue, or maybe it was the screening issue, so if I'm confusing it, based on a non-lawyer because the person was serving as an expert. I'm just not sure I necessarily agree that comment would apply to a lawyer. And is it comment 2 to, can you point me to the comment you're referring to again, Adam? To the rule?
yeah, I know you're talking about comment 2 to 1.10.
Yeah.
It mentions, so let me grab it.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now.
It says paragraph 8 does not prohibit representation by others in a firm where the person prohibited from involvement in a matter is a non-lawyer, such as a paralegal or legal secretary. So I know that the expert is a lawyer, but if we've said not practicing law, I think paragraph 8 does apply to the lawyer because it's a lawyer within the firm. But then comment 2 says ordinarily those persons must be screened. And so it seems like a fairly strange result to me that you could have I could have a non-lawyer who has a personal interest is required to be screened. I could have a lawyer who previously worked for a firm that represented the other side, but didn't do the work that is required to be screened under Rule 1.110B. Or I'm sorry, A2, but that because this person was a lawyer and not a secretary, there's no screening requirement and it's okay under A1. That I am, A doesn't apply to non-lawyers at all, but comment 2 recommends screening when a non-lawyer, it falls within A. And now we're saying, well, because it's a lawyer, you can just take it on without any screening procedure. I don't like that result. So I have taken a leap, but less of one than imputing to everybody within the firm, I guess.
Adam, can I ask a question about that? The way I read the screening for non-legal employees, those are people who in effect pick up their disqualification from a former legal representation, right? That is to say, if a secretary or a paralegal comes over from another firm, right? They were actively involved in a representation that triggers 1.9, right?
I mean, it doesn't say that in comment 2, but yes, that's most likely what it's intended to address.
Right. So I'm just thinking this situation is distinguishable because we've already decided that there was never any 1.9 representation involved at all.
Right.
So nothing has moved through the sort of 1.9 matrix. So the exception for screening there, it seems, is designed to address a situation where people have information that really arises from a and this is different, right? This is not a situation where the lawyer has information. They were acting as a non-lawyer and they got the information outside of a representation or in a non-representation situation. I don't know whether that feels to me like that kind of provides the oomph behind part of Sarah's concern, is that these are really different situations.
So let me get back then to Sarah's concern about using the material limitation side.
Well, but I mean, you see the point that I'm making a separate point about material. Yep. This is independent of material limitation.
So if I don't screen expert who has a personal interest because expert knows confidential information of the other side, if I don't screen expert from that case, am I now creating a significant risk of materially limiting the representation of the client by the remaining lawyers in the firm?
I think you are, Adam, but I think that's the reason, like, to me, that's the reasoning why the lawyer should be screened, but I just don't think comment 2 applies here.
So you think that the screening would be to prevent that material limitation, not anything to do with comment 2? I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing how comment 2 applies, because even though they were previously acting in a non-lawyer capacity, they're still a lawyer in connection with analyzing the imputation rules. Now I feel like you have to analyze, you know, their role as a lawyer for the law firm who is contemplating taking on this new representation.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
And maybe I can footnote comment. I mean, I can leave comment 2 out completely, but I think it's on point enough to mention. But I don't know that I mean, even comment 2 doesn't require screening. It says screening. It says ordinarily.
The other reason I had, in addition to what Steve was expressing earlier, my other concern just about comment 2 is the first part of it saying doesn't prohibit representation by others in the law firm, or the person prohibited from involvement is a non-lawyer. I just don't think that part of the comment even applies at all here, because the person prohibited is a lawyer, despite the fact that in the, you know, the conflict created by their role as a non-lawyer, as an expert. So I still think it's a little bit of a stretch to say it applies.
Okay. I suppose then, looking at this, creating the screen and being able to prove that you created one would rebut the presumption of disclosure of confidential information under shadow traffic too. In other words, I don't think we're writing a screening requirement. I think what I'm going to end up having to say is, I don't know how you get around this without screening. So ethically, are you required to do one? No, but you're running into all sorts of problems and you probably should.
I have a question, Adam, that I wanted to get your feedback on in the other subcommittee, and anyone, about the idea. When I was reading this, I liked the additional references to disqualification. And to me, I feel like besides protecting that confidential information, the risk of disqualification is such a big issue, right? And we talked about how the expert isn't going to have these traditional duties to disclose like a lawyer would, because they're the expert role and in that role. But whether or not we wanted to include some kind of a footnote related to a reference to the fact that the lawyer hiring an expert and assuming that the expert, of course, is going to make all the disclosures that they need to make, and that's assuming that that expert does correctly, would have a duty to disclose that expert's role, the potential for disqualification. Because I look at this and the overwhelming thing, it's just a huge risk of disqualification in a lot of these scenarios, right? Whether or not, however this plays out with disclosures and whether that works or whether you have screening, you can't sort of avoid that. And I know we don't talk about the disqualification issue, but the duty to disclose, and then that lawyer, the hiring lawyer, would also have that duty to, potentially not use any confidential information that they got from that lawyer in any way inappropriately, like as an agent, or to make sure that like not use that improperly as like an improper way to get that information in, like the vehicle through the lawyer. But I know I'm not trying to turn this into like a separate scenario, but I think it occurred to me that disclosure issue and the fact that that's part of the decision about whether or not to hire this expert in the first place, right? In some of these situations, depending on the order of thing, that's such an important part of it, that I wondered whether we could put that in a footnote or have some type of a reference to that issue.
Would a footnote at around 180, the bottom of page 6. This is the first scenario of lawyer first, then expert. Would a footnote after hiring, so this is the one that talks about the fact that the law firm can be disqualified as well, that mentions the duties of the hiring lawyer to vet an expert properly regarding conflicts. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly. I didn't really think about exactly where I want it to be, but I feel like that,
Okay.
it'd be in the scenarios 3, 2, or whatever, when you're talking about these sort of things that are happening I don't know, but if you knew that you were going to hire an expert who had previously served as a lawyer, like you said, or that, but that in some capacity they have this confidential information, that would be something that, it would be important to let the clients know about that. And you also have the fact about which I think you've already addressed there in the sort of the contemporaneous scenarios where, of course, the law firm would have that duty to tell their clients, and that there's these risks created related to the disqualification that I think are important disclosures. I know we're going a little bit past the hour. I don't know if there's other comments that people have or for
Adam, I have more comments, but I can just send you an email.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just send you an email.
And Adam, I have a few more thoughts as well. If you'd like to send me a Word version, I'd be delighted to, where I have thoughts about language, I'd be happy to put them in, and then you can think about them.
Sure.
And if you could include me on that as well, I have some suggestions, or I could just use the latest draft you circulated before the meeting, or if there's a meeting draft, maybe that Mimi could share.
Yeah, or maybe send us the meeting draft. That'd be fine.
Do you guys want the clean or the red line?
I'd like I'm happy to work with the red line. I think that makes it easier to see where Adam has already been at it.
Okay.
Adam, this is Joel. I've got a couple of little comments, particularly about the issue of designated and testifies, and I'll send those to you in an email.
Okay.
Okay, great. Why don't we break for lunch and we can come back at, what do we want to say? People want to still come back at 1 o'clock, or do you want a little bit longer? What is the consensus? All right, let's go back at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. I may be a couple of minutes past 1, but I'll be back.
Thanks, Joel.
Okay, we can begin.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mimi. I think we will now move on to the next item for discussion, which is the attorney as advocate outline. And Kyla, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so This is just a very bare bones outline. Thank you, Justin, for giving me a little feedback, even though I sent it to you the day it was due. But so this was I guess I can just start with my ask for the committee, which is whether we think this topic is worthy of an opinion, because I certainly have, like Justin, helped identify a kind of route that I can continue with some sort of legislative history type research and try to get a little bit more information. But I'm just wondering if we think it's even worthy to get information. So this was a question that was an anonymous comment, specifically about situations where, from what I understand from the comment, and then also from reading this Attorney General opinion, that that only attorneys are allowed to represent families in these quasi-judicial hearings in the special education realm, and that there used to be a practice where lay people would represent in the hearings and in meetings before the hearings, and they were called advocates. And the commenter seems to be concerned about a situation where an attorney identifies themselves as an advocate and then works in these, I guess in this case, it would just be in meetings leading up to the hearing, because now it's clear that non-attorneys can't represent people in the actual hearings, but that maybe in communications before the hearing, the attorney says, I'm an advocate representing so-and-so. And for some reason, that's a problem, because maybe the person on the other side, their response is different than it would be if they knew that this person was a licensed attorney. So the outline just kind of goes through the Attorney General opinion identifies certain areas where basically the Attorney General opinion says that because the language of the regulation about these hearings does not specifically say that a lay person can represent clients in these hearings, therefore we're not going to say that it's allowed. And there's a footnote that lists out all the specific areas where the legislature and also administrative agencies who have been given permission to make these decisions have chosen to and have expressly given parties the option of lay representation. So in the special education realm, it's like expulsion hearings. There's workers' compensation appeals board hearings, franchise tax board. There are areas where you can have a non-lawyer represent you, and then there are areas where the legislature is silent on it. So the question is, I guess, is there an ethical issue with an attorney, I guess, not disclosing right at the outset that I'm an attorney, I'm a licensed attorney, and instead calling themselves an advocate. And then the outline just kind of gets like lighter and lighter as I go, because I just kind of started to brainstorm ideas of areas where there might be some sort of an actual meaningful difference between being an attorney and therefore bound by certain rules versus being a lay person, thinking about CASAs, thinking about advocates, like gun reform advocate is what I came up with. And then when I was just kind of doing a Lexis search on just terms like advocate, attorney, I kept coming up with the advocate witness rule, which has nothing to do with this, except that it made me think this is just kind of a confusing thing about in the advocate witness rule, advocate means licensed lawyer. And so it's almost a little confusing to be making this distinction between a lawyer and an advocate when we have entire concepts where we call lawyers advocates. And so that's just kind of an aside at the end there. But yeah, so the thing that Justin suggested that I think is a great idea is kind of looking at this list, the footnote in the Attorney General opinion of areas where lay representation is allowed, looking at, you know, why was it allowed, and was there any discussion of, and if the reasoning behind allowing attorneys to be, allowing lay people to represent people in some situations, but then in this very particular situation, not allowing it, there might be some understanding of what the possible ethical pitfalls are there. But as far as the Attorney General opinion goes, in this special education quasi judicial hearing situation, the reasoning was just that it's very court-like, these hearings. Like there's witnesses and there are rules of evidence, and there's just a lot of issues that come up that they're saying, you know, a layperson can't adequately represent someone in these situations because it is so trial-like in these situations. So that reasoning makes sense to me, but that's all just the background of this question of is there even really an issue raised by an attorney being in this situation and not being totally upfront about their being a licensed attorney. And I kind of just copied and pasted the language of the rules that I think are relevant here, just kind of for my, just to have them in front of me. But I know that everybody on this committee knows these rules already. So yeah, so I'm any suggestions on a path to take, or whether you think it's not even worth taking a path, or I welcome any comments.
Yeah, Kyla?
Hmm?
This Joel, my first thought was, who are we trying to protect here? If the organization permits, or the tribunal, whatever you want to call it, the administrative body permits non-attorneys to appear and advocate for participants, I don't know how it should be material to require somebody to disclose that they're also an attorney licensed, as opposed to an attorney, someone who went to law school, but hasn't practiced. And then, but that's the issue of the tribunal, and I don't see it being an issue unless the rules require it, and that's the tribunal's obligation. And as to whether it means, if I'm a licensed attorney and want to go out and advocate for gun rights, I don't have any general obligation to disclose that to anybody, but I still have all the obligations I might have as an attorney just acting generally in the public. And I know if you participate on the Association of Professional Responsibility Lawyers, we've been batting that around with all the, you know, what was Rudy Giuliani doing? Was he being a lawyer or not being a lawyer? Does he still have the same obligations? And that would be whether he disclosed he's being a lawyer or not. So I'm not so sure I'd find a lot of interest in this guidance, but.
Yeah, I agree with you, because when I actually first read the comment, I had to read it a few times, and I was thinking that it was the opposite situation, where it was a non-attorney making themselves out to be an attorney, and I still don't know, you know, if that would even be worthy. But I went back and I thought, oh, actually it's an attorney who's just not making it clear that they're an attorney, and I'm not sure if I'm convinced that there are things that would happen in the meeting or negotiation leading up to the hearing that if if I knew the person on the other side was an attorney as opposed to an advocate lay person representing, that I would say something differently, or my strategy would necessarily be different. I'm not even sure if I'm convinced of that premise, but I think that that's the entire premise of the commenters' issue, is that had I known this person was an attorney and not just an advocate, things would have been different. And so it's false and misleading and unethical for them to not say that they're an attorney. And I don't know if I'm convinced by that.
So Kyla, one of the ways that I read it, and my first question was the same as Joel's, which is, who are we protecting from this? If somebody introduces themselves as though a layperson, but really they have this special skill, I don't know that we're protecting them but what occurred to me is maybe we're looking at it from a standpoint of essentially directed contact with people, right? It's the way to get the foot in the door. Hey, I'm just an advocate, come talk to me. And then, okay, actually I'm a lawyer. Let me get you on as a client. Let me bring you in. But I didn't really see that in the question that they presented. So I thought that maybe I was just reaching, but that's really the only way I see this is potentially a public protection thing. Is this tantamount to directed contact somehow? But
yeah, my second hypothetical, that's kind of where I was going down that line, because I was thinking in terms of like advertising and stuff like that, and saying maybe if I'm having a tough year and I'm not getting a lot of business, maybe I drop my hourly rate down and call myself an advocate, and people think they're getting a good deal because I'm not a lawyer, but I can represent them in certain areas. But it's like, then the client is, I'm still bound by the ethical rules. And so the client's actually is getting a good deal, and they're getting an attorney for the price of an advocate. So what's
unless the title of advocate is being used to deceive, and
exactly.
like, well, I'm not really a lawyer, so you can't really sue me or anything. But in your conclusion, you say the lesson is like, don't be sketchy when you characterize yourself.
Yeah.
Those would just be straightforward. You can't just go out and commit fraud.
Yeah, and that's why I pulled up the rule about specializations. Like, it feels like that to me, where you can advertise to a certain extent as long as you're being truthful, but you can't just make things up or purposely say things that make it sound like you're specialized in a certain area when you're not. Or I guess in this case, it would be not specialized in a certain area. But yeah, okay. These comments are helpful just in that I think my kind of gut feeling is shared by multiple people, which is kind of like, well, where's the issue here? But I'd love to hear from anyone else too.
Yeah, I think, Kyla, first of all, I think you did a tremendous job with the outline. It was really helpful to kind of navigate this preliminary issue. I was very interested in this sort of history about these different types of roles, and didn't fully appreciate that there was like this area where, where expressly like lay people can kind of come into these administrative bodies and do this. And so that was really interesting to me, because I think, not that I think that should be part of this opinion, but like the whole issue of like UPL and sort of like non-lawyers doing things that are not really the practice of law, and what does that look like, and where's that line, but a couple of things. I think the point that's getting in this question, which I agree with you, it's very specific in this fact. And I think to make this more interesting, if we were going to talk about some of these issues, you'd want to have more than one fact pattern, which is what you sort of attempted to think through. But I do think that there's potentially an issue related to how the person, certainly like you identified, how you hold yourself out. Whether, are you misleading someone into thinking that you're not an attorney? Most people who are advertised in the way or licensed practice law don't call themselves they may say that they advocate for this or that, but that's very different than sort of a lobbying role that a person could take. So that's lobbying would be one sort of advocacy that would be maybe non-lawyer related. But there's also that rule 3.9 that I was looking at, to advocate in a non-judicial proceeding, which potentially has some crossover here, which is basically saying that if a lawyer is representing a client before any kind of administrative agency or body, in a non-adjudicative matter, they have to disclose their appearance in a representative capacity. So that rule says you have to do that. You have to say specifically you're representing a party in that way, of course. And I think the other issues relate to maybe 4.2 and some of those where I would think that the harm potentially, which I thought part of this was getting at, is that there may be families or other people around or opposing parties. Maybe the opposing party isn't represented. They don't really know whether or not they assume you're a lawyer, or maybe they don't assume you're a lawyer. And so they act or do certain things, in a way that violates the rules, because you need to make it very clear if they're unrepresented and you represent a party, you have to disclose that. So I guess, I think there are some things related to that issue about sort of just the general concept of being, character, you should never be in a situation where, in my view, it's unclear whether you're acting as a lawyer or you're acting in a representative capacity, right? And if it's unclear, by the way that, that there's a particular situation in which advocates are allowed and they could be lay people, then you need to make clear that you're not acting as a layperson, that you're acting as a lawyer. And that, I think that kind of always needs to be clear. And I think that's an important point, because we do wear different hats sometimes, like we talked about expert hats or other hats. And in this context, I do think it's really important that for the other parties, for the administrative body, for a potential client, that it all has to be very clear, like, what role you're acting in and what capacity, and, if you're representing a party or not,
So do you think, Dina, that it would come out, kind of fall under the penumbra of like candor towards the tribunal and fairness to other parties, as well as just concepts of just like honesty in advertising, such those general types of concepts?
Yeah, I mean, it could have an umbrella with some of those things. I mean, I think they certainly would apply to that. I mean, I see the challenge of taking what we got, which was a very factually specific scenario, and saying, well, what is, how do we use this scenario in a way that it's like not completely only applicable to this small little subset of people, and really it addresses maybe a potentially broader problem, which is like attorneys acting in different capacities, or, because I do think it seems weird for an attorney to call themselves an advocate if they were in this world. I don't, even if that's what, and there would be any question about whether they were actually being advocate or not. There's, I think, probably a separate issue which we wouldn't deal with, which is like people saying they're an advocate that aren't lawyers, but they're also like, and then there's a question about whether they should still be doing this particular thing as a non-lawyer, but they were maybe permitted to, or maybe they are permitted to under those lay statutes that you referred to in those types of proceedings. And that sort of being unclear about that. But as a lawyer, I think it needs to be pretty clear about why you're there and what you're doing. If it's a representative capacity, are you there? I mean, because lobbying is a totally different thing. Like you said, Hunter, advocating for like gun control or something like that. That could be something you do on behalf of yourself because you feel very strongly about it, or on behalf of an agency. That would be, and is that really a representation? I mean, there's, depending on what you're doing, right? So
I suppose when I said, like what's the big deal, and like how would you act differently if you knew, then maybe in this situation, obviously when you get to the actual hearing part, you have to be represented by a lawyer, but I guess you can have a non-lawyer leading up to it. But maybe if in that initial meeting with the other side, you identified yourself as a lawyer as opposed to as an advocate, maybe the other side would say like, oh, I need to get myself a lawyer because the other guy has a lawyer. And we're going to take this all the way to the hearing, and I'm going to need a lawyer at that point anyway. So that might change their strategy in that sense, where they want to keep the playing field even by having the same kind of like arsenal on their side. So maybe that's a situation.
Kind of a 3.4 issue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not sure there's a problem. I mean, if the administrative agency doesn't require that there be a distinction made, isn't somebody free to have any advocate they want? And just because I have a law license, and this is heresy, I mean, it doesn't mean I'm smarter than Albert Einstein. I mean, so I just don't see it as misleading. You want an advocate? I'm an advocate. I also sell hot dogs on the side. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be a material or a misleading thing that I happen to be better at it than somebody who just sells hot dogs. I don't know.
Well, I think there's two parts to this fact question. One is how you present yourself to the agency. And I would be curious to know about how you think that rule 3.9 fits into that first part of the question. But the second, Joel, deals with this attorney or advocates interacting with other unrepresented parties and going to meetings, and whether or not those families understand when they're meeting with someone that the other side has a lawyer, whether they would act differently. It certainly seems that, I mean, we have an obligation to make sure that parties know that we're representing another party and we're acting as an attorney. So I think that's a potential issue on the second part, whereas in that capacity, I think it's separate, whether like the issue of presenting yourself to the administrative body, and maybe it's permitted to do that, but how you identify yourself, you still need to be like, am I here representing a party? Am I acting as their lawyer? Like, I don't know. I'd be curious to know what other people think, because to me, it feels like that needs to be pretty clear, like what your role is, I'm not saying you have to say I'm a licensed attorney if that's not required, but to identify that on the record there, but to make sure that it's clear that you're representing someone, that you're there on their behalf, and if that's required to be disclosed, then you need to disclose that.
Yeah, so what's really struck me, I didn't really articulate it in this way in my own mind, but I thought Hunter really formulated it nicely, indicating that there are disclosure, fairness type issues related to the person being represented, I'll say, to the party on the other side, if there is one that's unrepresented in the hypothetical, and then the tribunal. And what struck me about the Attorney General opinion and these statutes that are cited, and what I don't know the answer to, is whether any of them involve situations where there could be an unrepresented party on the other side. Because at least to me, in this kind of conceptual phase, I'm interested to know how often, or if ever, there are situations where an advocate who's a lawyer as well is in fact communicating with an unrepresented party in what will become some kind of disputed matter. When does that come up? Does it come up in any of these various instances where the legislature has said that basically an attorney can serve as an advocate in these proceedings, or someone can have a non-lawyer serve as their advocate in these proceedings? Or are these unique cases because there is no unrepresented party on the other side? And if that's the case, well,
when you say unrepresented, do you mean by anyone or just by a licensed attorney?
I'm thinking of the sort of the hypothetical that was raised. The concern raised by the anonymous comment seems to really focus on when there's an unrepresented party on the other side, and the other side being the one with the advocate who's really an attorney. And the concern that that unrepresented party is going to make decisions or be confused or whatever it is, because there's an advocate on the other side who's really an attorney and sophisticated and all of that. And so I would be curious to know if there are any contexts in which this actually comes up, that, this hypothetical. I think we now understand more about the education context based on your research, but in any other context, are there situations where an attorney serving as an advocate is having touches, communication, interactions, negotiations, potentially with someone on the other side who's unrepresented, who's not the government, who's not the tribunal with an administrative individual for the government adjudicating something like, a pension dispute or something like that. And I don't know the answer to that, but to me, that would be the most interesting hypothetical from an ethical standpoint. are there concerns about fairness and disclosure to that unrepresented individual? And then relatedly, I think the second most interesting part for me is the disclosure obligations to the, I'm again using the term loosely, represented party by the advocate, and whether there are solicitation issues and things along those lines that come into play. Is the title advocate being used in a way to bring in really legal business in a way that we might find ethically problematic? And then for me, the duty to the tribunal is an interesting one. I'd put that as the third most interesting of the three to me. But if we were to pursue this further, and at least from my perspective, I think it's worth at least one more round of research, is to see in what context does this come up where there is actually on the other side some kind of unrepresented individual who's potentially having contact in some manner with an advocate.
Yeah, because I have experience just from the clinic that I was in law school with the expulsion hearing situation, because I was an advocate in that situation, a law student practicing under the supervision of lawyers, but there was never, that was, you're representing a student who's being expelled. And so the school and the principal always have, the counsel, the school's in-house counsel. So, but yeah, I can see how that would be an interesting hypothetical where they're not represented on the other side, and maybe the legislature allows lay representation because they assume that everyone's going to use lay representation. So it is a slightly unfair playing field if you have lawyers that are coming in and representing. But yeah, so maybe that is where I focus my the next round, is looking at those situations that the Attorney General opinion cited, and any other situations that we can come up with, and kind of look at, well, who's on, what do these situations look like, who's, kind of what's at stake and who's on each side, and see if there are other hypotheticals. Because if it's something that comes up or could come up in other situations, then maybe it's worth an opinion.
If you're going to go down that route and research it, then I'd be curious to know where, excuse me, why would we draw the line at a tribunal or a sort of an administrative tribunal, as opposed, for instance, a contract negotiation? I'm the president of our HOA board. I'm an attorney. If I walk into a negotiation with someone who's not an attorney and say, I'm the advocate for our board here, I'm the advocate for our organization, do I have to disclose I'm an attorney as well? And why or why not? So, I mean, I'd like to then put some, if we're going to go down that road, I'd like to know where the guardrails are.
And I mean, that's kind of, that makes it, that takes away that kind of, this is such a narrow situation problem that I was having, because we all do things outside of being lawyers. So that kind of makes it more applicable to us, like literally you with the HOA board. Like, I think we all would say that we're attorneys, but in what situations do we have to, and what rules are implicated?
Yeah, that might be a good starting point to get some, maybe a more realistic scenario. If I'm selling my house and I decide directly to negotiate with the purchaser, take away the HOA and whether they're a represented third party. It's just me directly as a lawyer, homeowner. I want to negotiate a sale of my house, and I'm drafting the contract, and I'm, editing it, and I'm negotiating it. Do I have any obligation to tell the purchaser, who may or may not have a lawyer, that when I'm not a homeowner, I'm a lawyer? I don't think so, but maybe we could just confirm that, and that might then dovetail into some of these related questions that Joel is raising. So maybe that would be an easy place to start, confirm the answer, and then see where that takes us.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit different scenario than Justin, than what Joel described, because I think in your situation,
No, yeah,
like you don't need to say like, by the way, this is my vocation. They probably know because they're, but like if you're going to go in and say like, I'm an advocate for the HOA board, the question is, do you represent them? Like, are you just one of the many members who they said, hey, Joel, why don't you go take, and in which case, so that raises questions, and that's, to me, that raises a lot of questions. But it's different. That's very different, I think, than your scenario where you're appearing on behalf of somebody or in some capacity, and whether, to me, that would require clarification in most situations. But if you're just for yourself saying like, I'm going to go negotiate a particular thing, that I don't see that that's an issue, so, but it certainly would be.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid the what is providing legal services question in Jules' hypothetical, but perhaps that's actually at the heart of what we're talking about here. Is
I'm not so sure it's a different situation, because as the president or as an officer of an organization, I am the organization for the purposes of speaking as a client.
Yeah.
Agent, and that a corporation can only speak through its agents. So do I have to disclose that I'm a lawyer any more than you do or don't when you're selling your home?
Yeah.
No,
Well,
but yeah, go ahead.
Well, if you take a look at 4.3, right, which is the rule that governs negotiations with communicating with an unrepresented person, it says in communicating on behalf of a client with a person who is not represented by counsel. So in the situation that, and clearly the goal is to make it, you shall not state or imply that the lawyer is disinterested or, or give legal advice. So that's clearly a kind of an anti-deception policy, but it's deception about your role as a representative. So it would seem to me that at least that 4.3 wouldn't apply. Now, for the reason that Joel stated, it wouldn't apply to to the negotiation of a house, the sale of one's own house, or the purchase of a house as acting on your own behalf, and it wouldn't apply to Joel as the representative of the board, because he is not acting on behalf of a client. He's a constituent of an organization. And that makes sense to me. And I don't really think that's the case that we're focused on here. We're focused on a situation where you are representing somebody, so that at least the sort of non-deception policies of 4.3 are potentially implicated. But the question I have, Kyla, and I can't tell whether this is an actual problem or not.
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
That's the real question to me, is why, I can imagine, to me, that's the question. Why would you as a lawyer care one way or another about whether you're designated as an advocate, full stop, or an attorney advocate, right? Why would you ever, and the piece that seems the most plausible to me as an actual ethical concern is a person who, I don't know how to describe it, who uses the fact that they're an attorney to market themselves as an advocate, right, while seeking to be outside the rules of professional conduct, so that they can, and business getting would seem to be the most important reason for being outside the rules of professional conduct, so that you can, in fact, contact people in person and solicit their business, for example, which you presumably do as an advocate, but you couldn't do as a lawyer, right? That feels like the most important actual application of this rule, or of this kind of distinction. Maybe I'm missing something, but the others don't feel like they have much bite, whereas that might have some real bite if that's a real issue.
Well, the question that when you talk about what a lawyer must or do or not do on behalf of it while representing a client, does an advocate have a client? That would be one question that we'd have to look at. And the other, or the advocate just is providing a service to someone, a customer. The second question would be, I know there are some ethics opinions that talk about even though appearance before an administrative body does not constitute the practice of law for UPL purposes, certain aspects of it do have require someone who is a lawyer to do certain things. And I can't remember, I know I've read a few of those over the years, and we'd have to dig those up and consider them as well.
Well, I don't think I'd favor writing another opinion right now if all we're talking about is the ability of an attorney to disclaim being an attorney, right? We know that if you're doing something where a lawyer, where you could reasonably regard it as providing legal services, and you don't give a really good disclaimer, and the client isn't sophisticated enough to understand the disclaimer, you're going to be subject to the rules of professional conduct. Query whether we need to go through that again, unless we really think there's a problem here that that needs to be solved.
Does anyone else have any feedback that hasn't spoken yet about whether they think it, about sort of the merits of pursuing this, or like maybe another round of looking into a certain angle, or whether in terms of the usefulness of this opinion?
I'm still not sold on whether we should pursue this as an opinion, in part because I'm still having a hard time understanding the distinction between lawyer appearing as another party's or a party's advocate versus attorney. I don't quite get it. And looking at the hypothetical or the situation that was described by the anonymous commenter, where he or she or they say, knowing that the advocate was in fact a licensed attorney would have changed the kind of information that would have been disclosed or something like that. And that just seems so specific to this particular commenter situation.
Yeah.
In terms of I think the formulation of the question we're looking to ask, I think in order to be helpful, we have to take it really far afield from what the original commenter was asking about. So I think maybe we could look into it further to see if there's something there. So I mean, I think if we're going to continue to go after it, I think that would be the question is this something we're going to continue to go after, and looking at it from different angles after this discussion might be helpful.
Yeah, I don't even know if the original comment should even necessarily be a hypothetical, just because of what we've been talking about, where like, does this situation really come up, or is it just such a niche situation? But using that as a starting point and using that attorney general opinion just for the very helpful kind of analysis in terms of what situations do allow lay representation and which ones don't, and why in this particular situation they didn't allow it. I think that's the only kind of this original ask that would even appear in the opinion. But I'm happy to kind of keep digging and see where it takes me for the next meeting.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you for your work on that, Kyla. And if feel free to reach out to others too if you have any more follow-up questions or things. But yeah, I think another look at it with some of the discussion of mine might open some doors, and then we can decide next time too. Yeah.
Great.
Or
Yeah.
whenever you're ready to present.
Yeah, because I just kind of thought myself in circles and then hit a wall. And so this is helpful to just have other people kind of talk through it. So, and somehow my dogs didn't bark this entire time. So I feel like it's been a win.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, so I think the next opinion that we're going to talk about is the file retention opinion. Amber, if you want to take it away. Mimi, if you could put that opinion up, that'd be great.
Working on it.
Oh,
Yes. You can go ahead and start though, Amber.
So-
I'm pulling it up right now.
Sure. So as you can see in the red line version, there weren't that many changes made. For example, a couple of the added text in the digest portion was just to clarify or specify certain limitations. So I don't think they are worthy of a discussion, or unless someone has a comment on them. The biggest issue that we've been trying to resolve, but I'm not sure that we have, is what the express agreement with the client with respect to the disposal of the file contents. What would be sufficient? What kind of information should be included in the advanced consent form? And I know that we kind of went around and around, and in the end, we decided that because there was no authority that compelled the kind of written or informed written consent requirement in the context of file retention agreement or file retention agreement, we decided that the best we could do would be to state that in formulating a file retention agreement, the lawyer should consider certain things like potential consequences and material risks to the client arising from the disposal of the file contents. And that's what I tried to do in footnote 4. And also footnote 4 was repeated in large part in footnote 9, which I think it was Dina who suggested that I tried to combine the two footnotes. And that's what I tried to do with the changes to footnote 4 and footnote 9, or deletion of footnote 9, sorry. Let's see. I think those are the substantive changes that I would like a feedback from the committee on. Oh, actually, there's one more thing. In footnote 14, I deleted "a lawyer may skip this step if there is a file retention agreement." And I wonder whether that should stay in, followed by see footnote 4. And those are the only comments that I have. So anyone has any comments about the changes that were made in this draft or anything else? No one?
Amber, I think that, I mean, for some of us, when the subcommittee, you already have our comments, so I don't really have anything to add about that. I will just say with respect to the footnote 14 change, I think you are, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you already addressed that in the revision that you made earlier to that sentence, which I think appears on the other page.
Oh, does it? Let me see.
For some reason, this doesn't have line, oh, it's a footnote. Line 292, or just a, where you say absent an agreement to the contrary, you kind of put that back in there.
True. Okay, so maybe the deletion of in footnote 14 is fine as is.
Yeah, because I think we just, I mean, it's kind of, as you noted, we've been back and forth on that issue about whether that includes this duty to like describe the actual and potential consequences of it, you know, and that would depend, of course, on when the retention agreement was entered into and, you know, whether those types of disclosures that may be required later on by a lawyer in this context in an arm's length transaction, whether it would be or not. And so that seemed, we didn't really have clear authority on that particular point, that it would be sort of like, if you asked for someone to agree to waive these things, you know, whether or not you, how you had to fully describe that. We ended up essentially kind of punting on that issue, right? Is that how you?
Right, and I know that at some point we decided that we should address it, but what I discovered is that there is just no authority for us to go farther than what's in the draft right now. So it's not, you know, entirely satisfying, but I mean, you can only work with with the authority that you have.
Yeah. Does anyone have any concerns about us not including those references to that? Because I think that's really the biggest change, Amber, right? I mean, just that issue of sort of not include, like, sort of referencing this requirement, advanced consent to this idea of the potential consequences of agreeing to a particular type of file destruction protocol.
Right, and you know, we do describe a number of potential scenarios or consequences, for example, with respect to closed files in criminal matters.
Yeah.
So I guess my hope is that footnote combined with the footnote that says, you know, the lawyer should consider these potential risks and consequences, that the reader of this opinion would be thoughtful in considering those things when obtaining client's consent to file retention or destruction.
Right, and I think that's helpful, and it deals with that. That's, like you said, the competency issue in terms of whether or not you could, you know, have a client agree to something that was sort of beyond your general duties of, you know, like alleviating you a general duty of competence towards the client, which you can't, right? We kind of already have that concept in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think it looks great. I think those minor changes, I think, are the right direction for it. Does anyone have any comments or questions or feedback? This is one that I think if everyone's on the same page about it, we would vote it out for a 90-day public comment period. Okay, going once, going twice. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make the motion to vote it out for 90-day public comment.
I have Kyla, and the second was made by
Brandon.
Brandon. Thank you, Brandon. Kyla Rao, seconded by Brandon. So the motion is to approve this opinion for a 90-day public comment circulation. I'll take the roll call vote. Dina Roche?
Yes.
Ken Bacon, Sarah Bonola.
Sarah had to step out.
Okay. David Carr, Justin Fields,
Yes.
Toby and Linder,
Yes.
Adam Koss,
Yes.
Brandon Kruger,
Yes.
Amber Lee,
Yes.
Joel Mark,
Yes.
Kyla Rowe,
Yes.
Hunter Starr.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yay, great job. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you so much, Amber, for all your hard work on this, and Hunter for your contributions and hard work on it as well. I think
Thank you to you, Dina, as well. You've been very helpful.
so. Yay, we got another one out. All right, so I would like to, if it makes sense to do so, discuss that flat fee issues outline. I recognize that Ken is not here, and I don't know if any of the subcommittee members, Brandon or Joel, feel like they could maybe lead a little discussion on this that would be helpful in terms of reporting back to Ken, any thoughts that people had about it. Or if you don't, then we could just sort of get general feedback that people maybe had on the opinion. We don't have to spend a lot of time talking about it, but maybe that could be communicated to Ken if he's lead drafter on it in terms of feedback.
I'm not aware of the committee actually talking about this yet, so I just saw this draft when you guys did. Sorry to say.
Okay.
I don't have any special insights other than I think it's raising or begging a lot of important questions that I'm not aware of the answers to. And I'm really looking forward to, because I think they're really interesting, and Joel might actually know some of this just because of his great experience, but I think it'll be really helpful for practitioners to know that if they get a waiver allowing advanced fees not to be put in a trust account, they can be in the operating account. Can they be spent? Can they just be fully dissipated at that point, or are they still to be kept in an operating account till those services are performed and the fees are earned? But that's a sort of personal interest. I'm trying to figure out how that rule works. I don't have great insights on the rest of the outline.
Okay.
Well, then, it sounds like, Brandon, maybe we should put this over to the next meeting, but make sure that you, Ken, and I schedule a real working session sometime.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great idea. And if other people
Okay.
have comments that we should address in our subcommittee meeting that they want to let us know of now, that'd be helpful too.
Yeah, that's true.
Any thoughts that people want to raise about that outline? Questions or feedback? Okay.
Yeah,
So
no, hold on.
Okay. He's got some.
Well, I did not lots,
Okay.
but it feels I mean, it's helpful, I think, to explain, to do something on the sort of like the spirit of our opinion on prospective clients, right? I think it's very useful to explicate how the rules, the new rules, have changed this issue in a way that would be helpful to practitioners. In other words, it could be a way of kind of broadcasting that question. Now, I haven't looked at this that closely. I read it more closely for the last meeting, I have to say. And the question I couldn't get any purchase on at all was the second question, which is how to determine when a flat fee paid in advance is earned. Right? It kept coming up, but I didn't feel like the opinion gave any real help in resolving that question. I do think that's an important question, right? Although I'm not sure it's an ethics question as such, right? It feels like something that might be an arbitration advisory kind of thing. I'm not sure it's an ethical question, but in any event, I felt frustrated because I felt like there's quite a lot of writing here. A lot of it is laying out the proposition as to what the new rule has accomplished, which is great. But on the big question of whether it's when it's earned and what has to be refunded, it felt like there was no guidance. So that would be when you guys sit down to talk, I
Yeah,
think coming up with something more concrete on that, or figuring out where you could go for more concrete guidance on that would be helpful.
That's a fair comment, because the rule change has impacted that. And my more guess than knowledge is that what the rule change has done is say that the flat fee is earned when you get it, but it is and it can go into your general account, you can spend it, but it's subject to refund if you don't earn it, as opposed to when it goes into a trust account. That has to be the distinction between why it can be put into your general account and not into the trust account, when it might still be subject to some kind of refund. It's just a question of whether it's in trust or it's your personal liability as damages at some subsequent date, which is something I think that we do well to look into.
That's super helpful as a way of thinking about it. That I find that and then if you frame it that way, it ties right into the question that Brandon's been wanting to get an answer to, you were describing earlier, which is, can you just spend it any way you want? And is all that's left a contractual obligation to refund?
Well, obviously, if it goes into your general account, it's subject to commingling, and that's no different than spending it.
Yeah.
And you owe a debt because you didn't do something that you were contracted to do, you'll have to pay it back somehow, but the client won't have the protection of a trust account.
I think it's a really interesting issue, Joel, because I think you're probably right. But if you take it out of a trust account and spend it before you've completed the services that make the flat fee fully earned and non-refundable, that's misappropriation. But if you do the same thing out of your operating account with a proper valid waiver, is it no longer, from a disciplinary point of view, a misappropriation? It's just now a new legal obligation or debt. That's a really interesting distinction I think we should look at.
Yeah.
How is it any different in that, Brandon? I've never even considered that after it's been paid in the trust account, but how is that any different from like in a fee arbitration, when the client says, not only do I not want to pay you, but you were charging me unreasonable fees for the last year and I want my money back? It's just then a question of who has the money. But I wanted to, Joel, I thought I heard you say that putting it into the operating account makes it earned at the time of payment. Did I? Because 15 something, 15D prohibits earned on receipt unless it's a true retainer. So it can't be earned even if you stick it into the operating account over trust.
It's not earned until you complete the services.
Right. So even though it's given to you, even though you put it in your operating account based on the 1.115 disclosures that you gave, that doesn't make it earned. That just means it's basically you're being advanced a fee that you will later earn on a flat basis. And if you don't do the work, like I think you said, Brent, I think it becomes a contractual problem, not a discipline problem.
Yeah, perhaps if you amend my comments to say, instead of saying not earned, just say not subject to trust rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so there's no ethical prohibition on spending all the advanced fees before you've earned them and before you've completed the work.
Well, no, if it's in my general account, my creditors can get it.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it's not subject to trust rules. And the fact that my creditors can get my general account money, so far as I know, doesn't subject me to any kind of discipline, except in the event that I don't have the funds to pay my damages for something I got but didn't earn.
Right.
Now, the ethical,
discipline, right? If you didn't perform the services and your client comes back and says, I want my money back, that would still be subject to discipline. But
Yeah,
like you said, it's not in the client trust account. It doesn't.
Yeah, that's where
Now,
abandonment.
if you don't have an ability to repay it, or at the very least, take that portion of the disputed flat fee and place it in trust upon a dispute, I think then you're going to be in violation of 116 and 115 for holding disputed fees in trust and termination of the relationship, right? So you can spend it, you can commingle it, you can do whatever you want if it's an advanced flat fee that follows the rules of 115 for the disclosures to be paid into your operating. But if the client fires you or you quit or whatever it is, I think whatever amount of that flat fee is in dispute would need to immediately be placed into a trust account by the attorney as disputed fees.
No, I think there's authority to the contrary of that. In other words, anytime there's a fee dispute, you don't have to put any disputed amount that's already been accepted into income back into trust. I'm pretty sure there's an ethics opinion that says that, which I'd have to look up. So I don't know why this particular situation, after you've gotten permission to go ahead and subject it to your general account and all of those claims that might be made against it by my creditors, among other things, you'd have to put it back into trust. But it's a good question that we'd have to answer.
Yeah, that's different than the sort of the plaintiff's situation in which your client gets paid and it goes in the trust account and you get a portion of it. They've disputed what portion of it. It's already in the trust account, but of course you have to keep it in there, Adam, like you're describing, until that issue's been resolved. But this is a different situation in which you've already earned it, or you already have it. I shouldn't use the word earned, but it's already in your general operating account. Yeah, that makes sense. It also seems like there might be a place to suggest in a fact pattern or something that the attorney would have specific markers. Like if you were doing a flat fee for like a 3-pronged thing, that it's, that you've earned those fees in the completion of these various tasks, right? At certain points that would be helpful to the attorney in thinking about how to categorize the services. Because it's like, if you're like, this is a flat fee for like completion of the final product of the partnership agreement or the will or the trust or whatever the document is, and you give your client drafts along the way and they don't respond or they don't revise things, and it's like, then do you not get paid up to the point of like having completed certain types of things, right? So lots of people, I think, even with the flat fees, they'll have different segmented flat fee structures where it's like, when I hit this marker, you get the first draft is this. And then so that if the client doesn't respond or isn't fulfilling their obligation, that the attorney's getting paid for the work they've done, but that there's no situation where they don't get paid, right, up to the point of they've done it. But then if the client is being dilatory or there's some other reason that doesn't get completed, that they're not getting more than they should at that particular point for that flat fee. So anyway.
And I suppose the follow on to all that, Brandon, for you and Ken and me, is that we'd have to take a look at, to get the informed written consent of the client to make the deposit into the general account, what do you have to disclose, if anything, that's bad could happen to the client's money that wouldn't happen if it went into trust?
Right.
I wouldn't think you'd have to disclose anything more than what the rule says, specifically that you have to disclose like A, B, and C, right? Or whatever. The rule says what you have to disclose. I don't know too many people that say, that explain the consequences of all of that unless somebody asks them specifically, right? I mean, I don't know that we would say you have an affirmative duty to disclose more than what the rule says, but maybe people differ on that view.
Well, but there's general authority which says that any fee agreement has to be fully explained to the client at the outset in a manner that would be clearly understood by the client. Now, I'm just saying it's a topic we ought to take a look at. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with what you just said.
Yeah.
One other thing for the drafting team, I think should be, I didn't read it close enough to see if it was in there, but I have talked to a number, there's a big distinction on trust accounts and flat fees for costs. And the comment in there that says you cannot deposit an advanced an advance cost payment into your operating account. It can only be fees. And I have seen, because the folks that want to have these flat fees in their operating account don't want to deal with an IOLTA account at all. And they can't do it when they're taking advance costs. So I think that's important it doesn't need to be a part of it because it's not a question. It's just this is the rule, but it should definitely be mentioned.
I think you're absolutely right. I've seen people, well-intended people, make mistakes there.
When this rule first came out, I gave a talk at an immigration group who always takes advanced and don't want trust accounts. And we spent a half hour with them asking questions about ways to not have a trust account.
Yeah, don't take advanced costs.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that topic also played into the, what was it, about 10 years ago, the advisory, not the advisory, but the opinion, COPRAC opinion on credit card use. The difference between costs and fees accepting credit cards. We should take a look at that too and see if that gives us some kind of guidance to this issue as well.
Well, great. Thanks, guys. I think that was maybe a little helpful short brainstorming session, but maybe that'll help when you guys connect with Ken going forward on it. I think instead of taking a break, I want to just try to move through. And we'll probably, it looks like we're going to end early today, which I know we hardly ever do and might be welcome to people on a Friday in the middle of summer. But I think we're going to move on to the ethics of in-house counsel outline that Sarah and I worked on. If we want to put that up. And hopefully you guys had a chance to take a look at it. It's not too long. It was in those additional materials that Andrew sent out. And was at the end of those materials, it's 3 pages. And basically, it's, as you can see from the outline, it sort of gives this very general kind of overview of the scenario of a person moving from, maybe practicing law in private practice to going in-house, and what are the ethical issues they can, should consider or would apply to their new role as in-house counsel, and just a sort of, how we have done with some of these opinions is kind of an issue spotting, outlining of various issues. So that's pretty self-explanatory from that perspective. I think, one important issue is this, the approach we would like to tackle with this. The second one I would like feedback on. There's always that balance between having sort of like the super long opinion that talks about everything versus maybe breaking this up into more than one opinion, or taking this as an opportunity to focus on a couple issues related to this that we think are more interesting. Or also there's an opportunity to say something like, with conflicts here, if we talk about it, we can sort of identify some types of conflicts, but we're certainly not going to go into a big conflicts analysis. And we're not going to, on some of these things, it's more of like an issue spotting approach. So I would like to get people's feedback on the approach, as well as like substantively, if they think these issues are important, or if they think a different direction could be considered or broken up into more than one opinion, that kind of stuff. Do you have anything else to add, Sarah?
No, I don't have anything else to add. Thanks.
So I think this is a really interesting issue. I deal with in-house counsel a lot in my practice, and a number of ethics issues get raised with me from them. And so I can tell you, I think this will be very insightful for a lot of lawyers out there who work at companies. In terms of the issue spotting you've done and which topics to ultimately pick, some of this, like you said, is just that. It's just an issue spot that we can pick up an opinion that we don't have to spend a lot of time on. Your 3A ethics rule applies to in-house lawyers. Obviously that's going to be part of the kind of introduction to the legal piece of this. And so there you go. You could probably deal with that in one sentence, and then decide what issues are going to be most interesting to you. And I just wanted to flag, at least from my perspective, a couple of interesting issues. And I'm not suggesting these are the ones you'll ultimately select, but I think the conflict issues and the screening issues for in-house counsel is something that in-house lawyers and their departments in some instances don't have a very good handle on how to deal with. You know, lawyer comes, whether it's from a law firm or from another company, and has some kind of confidential information that might be pertinent to new employers' litigation. It happens a lot. Is that person properly screened? Oftentimes, maybe not so well, right? I think of that, I will butcher the pronunciation, but some people I think say Schlumberger, some people say Schlumberger. It's that case with the in-house lawyers. I think the lawyer was an IP lawyer, got confidential information about IP, and then went to a competitor and used that IP confidential information about IP in litigation against the former employer, and the entire in-house department from the subsequent employer was disqualified, and there was a failure to screen and all that stuff. I think that I'll send you the case site if you're not familiar with it. I think it'll have some interesting issues to think about when it comes to conflicts and screening. It kind of reminds me of, more of an analogy, but the Cobra Solutions case, where the city attorney and the whole city attorney's office got disqualified because of the prior work that the city attorney did for the former client. So I think those are really interesting issues, and it really is. There is some peril for in-house lawyers and their departments when they don't properly screen and address conflicts. So I would be in favor, at least, thinking through that further as you go along and deciding what issues to address. And I also think another really important one is this question of privilege vis-a-vis parents and subsidiaries, and for lawyers to, and being able to highlight the duty of competence for in-house lawyers and the need to understand how those issues are treated, particularly in California, of course, but it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So if you have an in-house lawyer based in California, and maybe Arizona, where they have cases, and Delaware treat communications with subsidiaries differently. Being aware of that kind of issue when it comes to privilege, I think, is important. And then finally, and then I'll be quiet, another issue I've seen come up is, well, so who's the client? The in-house lawyer works for the company, but then is asked to represent an individual in a deposition. For whatever reason, the company wants to save money. They don't want to hire outside counsel. So the in-house lawyer is asked to represent the individual, and maybe that deposition implicates some adverse information for the employer. What does that in-house counsel do then if the employee is about to say something that might either be damaging to the employer or damaging to the individual himself or herself? Is there a conflict there? Yes, there can be, and there's a couple cases on that are interesting that I can forward. That might have some further ideas in terms of your issue spotting. So I think this is really merits further consideration and for an opinion. And I really, again, thank you so much for putting this together for all of us.
Thanks. That was helpful, Justin, to hear your perspective on what you think are some of the important issues. As you were talking about them, it made me think that perhaps it might be difficult to tackle everything we have in the outline in one ethics opinion. So we might have to narrow it or consider two parts if we feel it's important to address everything. But
yeah.
Yeah, so this is Steve, and I'm again apologize for not having any picture, as my camera seems to be out. But I think this is a terrific outline. I do think you will want to. I don't think you want to do just soup to nuts. But that may be wrong. but I think you want to focus on the things that really are unique and difficult about being an in-house counsel. And those, it seems to me, the critical questions really, as I read the outline, it feels to me like it's confidentiality and who is the client, and that those interact in different ways. And I like the addition of the point that to emphasize, though, to people that they're in a law firm. I think that the kinds of issues that Justin identifies about taking on board confidential information are big, and those are very big in the decisions about whether to. I mean, think about the hypothetical of representing an employee agreeing to represent an employee. That conflict that comes from representing that employee, unless there's been something in writing by way of a waiver, will then be imputed to the entire corporate department. So representing the employee could take the whole corporate department out of the representation. And it's kind of, it seems to me that highlighting these kinds of issues about the way these decisions can blow up and is really important to find those areas where you really are operating in different territory, and you have to be more thoughtful and sophisticated. On the other hand, the duty to be competent more generally, not so interesting, right? To me, at least, in contrast with some of these other problems that stem from who's the client, confidentiality, etc.
Thanks, Steve. Any other comments? Yeah, I think that you guys make some good points. I think Sarah and I will probably have to get together and think about how we want to move forward. I mean, I wonder if people have thoughts generally about whether we should, how we should try to navigate, like pick a couple of topics that are on some of these thornier issues, and try to get some hypos around those. If we should just do something like this type of an opinion and issue spotting plus something else where, you know, and kind of make a map or a roadmap for more than one opinion on these in-house duties. That would be an option too, if we could kind of segregate some issues out. I mean, I think there are a lot of really challenging in-house issues. I don't think there's a ton of guidance on some of them. I mean, I think the conflicts of interest stuff that you talked about, Justin, I mean, I have some experience with that too. I think it's really challenging. I think that there's an aspect of that sort of dovetails on sort of the right of attorney mobility and things like that. If you're talking about being in an in-house department, going from one to the other, and maybe it's a competitor, but maybe it's like in a particular field that that's what you know, right? And it's a very, and so does that mean that you can't ever go to another legal department that, you know, happens to do a particular, you know, type of technology practice or something, because inherently you're going to know information that could somehow be related to a competitor. I mean, so I think that, and, you know, generally then you have a duty to disqualify yourself from everything in your entire, I mean, or screen yourself off from everything, and then how you determine what is substantially related. And I mean, those things are always kind of interesting, are very fact specific, and but I think a difficult and challenging thing to navigate. So, you know, so with that confidentiality piece, but so I mean, we could have some of that. I think that the confidentiality and who is your client too is kind of, like you mentioned, Steve, that's an interesting thing that has a lot out there. I know there's a lot of case law sort of on some of that stuff, right? The privileges. I mean, you're talking more about the like the duties of confidentiality relating to sort of like what your role is in terms of like wearing multiple hats, and is it really covered by privilege or not, and that those kinds of issues, Steve? I don't know if you can still hear me, but I mean, there's obviously a lot of case law on that, you know, but in any event, I don't, I think,
my guess, I don't have any prescriptive view, right? Except that I think that, to my mind, the most useful, that I would think about where you can make the provide the most help.
Yeah.
Right, and where you can provide the most help, in my view, is not in sort of providing, covering every issue. Right, the more helpful thing would be to identify some issues, and if there are ones that are really well covered and well understood, then it may be enough to. It may be enough. You may not need to go into such depth. Right, whereas there may be others that are really kind of surprising or that have a kind of got you effect, where it would be really helpful for people to sort of understand that there really are traps out there that can come and get them. That would be, so that's a judgment call, and I think you guys are well positioned to make it as to what would be most helpful.
Any other thoughts about the direction of the sort of an opinion? Okay, thank you for the feedback. And Sarah and I will confer and try to move forward, move an opinion on some or more of these topics forward in some capacity. Okay, so finally, the question of sort of the discussion of maybe the trial publicity opinion idea, Hunter. I know we don't have an outline to work off of, but I didn't know if you wanted to just get feedback on particular points, or whether you want to say let's punt and do it next time, or what I'll let you decide how you want to use the moment.
I would like some feedback, and I apologize for not getting an outline out. You guys will probably recall that I had some difficulty even formulating the question that I had, because it's going to be straddling some lines of, calls for reform, which I think we all agree is an affirmative good thing, and then denigrating the justice system, which I would like to think we can all agree is a bad thing. So when I first phrased it, I was thinking of it in terms of trial publicity, but the more I've looked at 3.5 and 3.6, the more I think it is more of a question about contact with jurors, because statements made publicly are problematic because of their effect on jurors. And so when I was looking at 3.5 G3, I think that's really more the question, is whether statements about blanket statements about parties or about the system fall afoul of Rule 3.5 G3, where you're going out and you're saying, hey, jurors, this is a corrupt system. If you're a juror, you got to make sure and nullify. You've got to make sure and get rid of these cases. So I went to Shepard versus Maxwell, which is kind of the trial publicity case, the big Supreme Court trial publicity case, which talks about kind of the dangers of a particular trial happening with improper or inadequate court-led control of those issues. And I've been able to do some research with regard to, Lind versus Medevac, kind of the standard juror contact case. What I've run up against is I found that I've only found one other state so far that has a provision similar to 3.5 G3. What I found is that the vast majority of 3.5 type rules really don't talk about the intent to influence the jury pool. They talk about harassing jurors, they talk about contacting jurors without their permission, but they really don't broach the subject of contacting jurors with the intent to influence jury, future jury service. And so the first rounds of formulating the question was, does denigrating the justice system kind of generally in the public eye, does that fall afoul of 3.5 G3 and consequently the rule in just misconduct? Or phrased differently, does calling for reform in a way that you're making false factual assertions with the intent to pollute the jury pool or with the intent to affect jury service in the future, does that fall afoul of 3.5 G3? And the way I was kind of playing with it, what one of the hypotheticals I thought I might use is, let's say a deputy district attorney writes a letter to the editor in a local newspaper and says, by the way, did you know that in 95% of cases, if you're a juror, you're not going to hear about all the criminal history of the defendant? And I thought to myself, well, we know that if a district attorney tells a juror right after a, let's say, a not guilty verdict, well, you didn't get to hear that he's done this and he's done that, that would fall afoul of 3.5 G3. But would just telling the public, hey, this is how rules of character evidence work, and the vast majority of cases, you're not going to hear about this. Are you intending to pollute the jury pool so that when jurors get in the box, they're saying, well, hold on, we don't know if we're going to hear what we want to know about. And so we're going to have to be looking online. And we're going to be having to be careful because we have to make the assumption this guy probably does have a criminal record. And the reason I was looking at it from that angle is because it's very easy to look at this as kind of a First Amendment issue. And then, of course, when you're talking about criminal cases, and I don't think this is as narrowly tailored as just applying to criminal cases, can be in tort reform. In criminal cases, you also have the nexus or the intersection between the Sixth Amendment and this particular issue. So if a criminal defense attorney wants to say, hey, you have to be careful about these police because, let's say, they're hiding evidence, or look at this police officer who was just indicted. I don't think we could go off and say, well, that would violate. I don't think so. I think that we'd have to draw this as a very narrow issue. So I would really like some help or some feedback with regard to tailoring an issue that does not basically get us into the weeds in the Sixth Amendment and the First Amendment right off the bat, that lets us stay within the, kind of long-standing California tradition of G3 of 3.5. So I'd really like any feedback or help with regard to making sure we're not trying to take up the should people be allowed to support reform, right? That's not the question. So any input would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting what you posed, Hunter. I read that as being sort of like a sort of a contemporaneous time sensitive, right? That statute where it's like after the discharge of the jury. So like very specifically, like you're saying, you go out in the courtrooms, the courthouse steps while the jury's deliberating. And I guess it's a question of like, is the jury allowed to consider, are they allowed to watch TV? Are they like, how long are they out in deliberations? And I think some of those questions would be related to that, right? And I don't, but I mean, I think what you're positing as a concept is like, yeah, I think that's directly intended to influence a jury pool, those kind of comments, right? And I guess it would depend on where the comment was made in the context of how it was made, right? Like whether it was made, just as part of a, but maybe before a case and maybe it implicates other things, or whether it was like directly after that in a way where the jury's still deliberating and there was no gag order in terms of their ability to like watch news or things like that. I mean, to me, that would seem highly inappropriate if that was the case, right? Like,
well, and one of the things you pointed out, which is really where I was when I was looking at 3.6 and 3.5 and juxtaposing them, it's like, one, when you're looking at what a prosecutor can't say about a criminal defendant, that's easy because you've got one guy, one set of circumstances, one case.
Right.
But because any prosecution agency, whether it's a city attorney or a district attorney or the attorney general, if you've got a prosecuting agency, they're the party in every case. So if you're denigrating that party, it may go beyond a specific case. And so trial publicity might be implicated. But I was like, well, okay, so you've got this, when a juror's discharged, that's what G3 applies to. But I was looking at everybody else's 3.5, and most of them say prospective jurors too. And I assume that means a veneerman, but does it mean anybody qualified and who's basically on the registry to become a juror? And that's why I was thinking in terms of if I just put out an article or a letter to the editor in the Bakersfield Californian and say, let me tell you about what you're not allowed to see. Well, somebody who's never been a juror before who reads that, they get their first jury call. I think I would have been polluting that juror with regard to how they're going to view that, which then got me thinking of what about my law students and what I teach them. But I figure that that's a clear break. So I definitely have seen that, like maybe it's a time sensitive thing. Maybe it's somebody who's an actual juror but perspective versus potential, I think maybe splitting hairs or may be really important to the issue.
Hunter,
Yes.
I'm looking at 3.5. Excuse me, yeah, 3.5, and I'm seeing you can't communicate directly or indirectly with anyone who knows to be a member of the venera from which the jury will be selected, right? So you can't communicate at all. And what these rules seem to be is they seem to have a kind of a logic, if you will, that's connected to trial and to the role of the individual juror in trial and the protection both of the decision-making process, right, and of the individual juror from improper intimidation or coercion, or what have you. And so as I read G, I think of it as, the case is over, right? So the risk of prejudicing the outcome is presumably reduced dramatically. And now we're balancing the interest of all lawyers in finding out how juries actually make decisions, right? And what matters to them and why a particular claim failed against concerns with harassment and unfairness to the juror. And so it feels quite narrowly focused on that set of issues, as distinct from what might be called broadcasting, which is what 3.6 is about. I mean, 3.6 is more about broadcasting. And so I find myself wondering, how well does the analogy from 3.5G3, this rather specialized rule, apply to broadcasting, right? And particularly broadcasting about issues of policy. And so that's where I have the question, and doesn't that throw you back into a kind of First Amendment piece, right? Because if you're broadcasting and saying, there's a feature of this system that's really unfair, which is that defendants' criminal records don't come out unless they testify or whatever it is, right? Are you intending to influence the jury pool in a specific case? Or is that just a general comment that would be protected by the First Amendment? I feel like you're thrown back in there, and that 3.5G3 doesn't give you that much help.
And that's definitely I feel like I'm ping ponging between that. And I feel like I would like to think that there's a kind of continuity where it's like this policy is carried over in this arena, but I don't think it is. And the more I look at it, the more, like you're saying, when you're broadcasting, there's simply no rule to say that you can't broadcast in a way that, if you're trying to influence the public, let's take election speech. You're talking about an election. This is the problem. Let me broadcast about this system to influence this election. I don't think that the rules necessarily intended us to be analyzing that to see, well, are you trying to influence individual people as people who are participating in elections, or are you trying to influence those people as they may become jurors? And so by ping-ponging back and forth between essentially what you've pointed out, I don't know that there's anything here. And if it is, I think it would be incredibly narrow. Like maybe a broadcast that is directly in response because you don't have permission to contact the individual jurors. or something along those lines. That being said, all of the rules that I have seen from other jurisdictions, because they focus on harassment, I don't know that a broadcast as opposed to targeted statements would be problematic, in the same way that targeted advertisements are more problematic than general advertisements.
Does anyone else have any feedback or comments they want to make related to some of these ideas for the opinion?
My comment is only, I find it a fascinating endeavor that I'm not sure can be done between the Sixth Amendment and First Amendment. I just don't know. I think it's a really fascinating topic to explore, but I think it's extremely challenging to figure out what sort of space exists for these rules that you're contemplating.
My proposal, Dina, is that I get you an actual outline like I was supposed to today, but I get you an actual outline. That way I can think through some of these with the feedback that I've gotten today. And once everybody can look at the outline, I think we'll have a much better idea if we're just spinning our wheels on this.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I definitely think whether it's this exact one or, I mean, I would love to see us work on some opinions that impact, criminal law, right? I just feel like that's one area with, we don't have as often have as many members that have as much experience like you in this, in the practice, and whether it's in like, prosecutor's office or public defenders, or just generally like some of those issues, I think there's not as many opinions on those topics as there are other topics that, of course, more commonly to civil practitioners, where there's the most applicable kinds of opinions. And so I really, I'd love to see what you come up with this, and, and also just like look forward to working on some other potential ideas related to, that practice area, and just, thinking, brainstorming for you, because you're our primary source of like, or what are some of these types of issues that can come up, and thinking about some of those, like with topics too, related to, issues with prosecutors' offices or not. And I know it's always a challenge, because without getting too political and then staying within the rules and those things. So I understand that there is a certain amount of, you might feel not a lot of flexibility on some of these things, or there's like areas that you don't necessarily feel comfortable getting into, but, that's an area that I think would be really helpful if you gave some thought to, besides, in addition or plus this at some other point in time. I would like to see us as a committee be able to do something in that area, more than one thing at some point in time, but yeah, as further expand on some of those ideas.
Well, thank you.
All right, so does anyone have anything they want to add, or is everyone just absolutely thrilled that we might be having an early Friday, which is very well deserved, given how hard everybody has worked for the past long time, the whole committee year. We've had some really intense meetings that have gone like quickly and covering a lot and require a lot of brain power and a lot of hard work in between. So I think that we definitely, deserve a break. So, all right, any comments? No? All right, so we'll all talk in the meantime, and then we'll have at least the last meeting for this configuration of the committee will be in September, and I hope everyone can attend, and we'll make some progress and hopefully finish out some things and go from there. All right, enjoy your Friday.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.